Silver Hollow, Arizona Territory, announced itself not with a bang, but with the weary sigh of steam and iron. It was late winter, 1886, and the air held the sharp bite of snow that had not yet decided to commit. Flakes, small and mean as sand, dusted the raw lumber of the station platform. The wind, finding no trees to argue with here, sang a thin, reedy tune through the telegraph wires overhead. It was a sound that got into a person's bones, a sound of pure, high loneliness. Night came on fast in these parts, swallowing the gray hills whole, and the town replied by lighting a few pale yellow oil lamps. They were feeble stars against the encroaching dark, offering little warmth and less welcome. Clara Ellison stepped down from the passenger car, her worn boot heel clicking softly on the gritty boards. She was 23 years old, though the journey and the worry had carved small, temporary lines around her eyes that made her feel older. She wore a cream-colored dress, the fabric tired and the lace at the collar mended twice. It was her best. In one hand, she held a small, scuffed leather valise that contained everything she owned. In the pocket of her thin coat, her other hand was clenched so tight her knuckles were white. It crumpled a letter, the paper worn to softness at the creases, signed with the looping, confident hand of a man named Thomas Lang, her promised husband. The train hissed, a great beast settling. Passengers, mostly men with dusty hats and tired shoulders, moved past her with purpose. They collected luggage, greeted familiar faces, and melted away into the growing dusk. The conductor, a man with a face like a worn coin, gave a final shout, swung his lantern, and hopped back aboard the caboose. The train groaned, jolted, and began to pull away, its heavy chuff-chuff rhythmic and final. Soon there was only the sound of the wind through the wires and the metallic ticking of the cooling rails. And Clara Ellison, she stood where she had landed, her valise at her feet, a solitary figure in a landscape that had no use for solitary figures. Her heart, which had been hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs for the last 100 miles, seemed to stutter and slow, trying to match the dying pulse of the iron. She waited. Surely he was just late. A rancher, as his letters suggested, would have chores that did not bend to the railroad's schedule. She forced her shoulders down from their hunch around her ears and tried to look hopeful, or at least presentable. But Silver Hollow was watching. From the lighted rectangle of the saloon door, from the shadows between the general store and the assayer's office, from behind the thin curtains of the rooms above the street, eyes were upon her. She could feel the weight of them. The townspeople did not stare openly, not at first. It was a series of quick glances, a head turned to whisper to another. The words, carried on the wind, were lost, but the meaning was clear. Mail order bride. The term hung in the air, as visible as her own breath. A few men lounging outside the saloon offered half smiles, the kind that were not smiles at all but assessments. They measured her worth in a glance, and she felt the familiar, hot shame rise in her throat. She looked away, focusing on the station master's window, but the office was dark. No one, not a single soul, stepped from the shadows to offer a hand with her bag, or a simple question, or a word of welcome. She was an object, a piece of freight left unclaimed on the platform. The chill, no longer just in the air, was seeping into her skin. She pulled her coat tighter, a useless gesture. The wool was too thin. Then the focus of the town shifted. The whispers did not stop, but they changed in tone, lowering, eddying around a new arrival. He did not ride in, so much as he emerged from the dusk, a part of the landscape taking shape. He rode a lean, tough-looking horse that moved with a quiet, ground-eating walk. The man, Taza Greyhawk, was still. His posture in the saddle was straight but not stiff, balanced, as if he had been born there. He was Apache, Chiricahua, and the rumors that preceded him were as much a part of him as the worn rifle stock that rested near his hand. He was a widower, they said. His wife had been taken by the sickness, the one that respected neither white skin nor brown. He was a former scout for the army, a fact that earned him suspicion from his own people and a grudging, fearful respect from the settlers. Now, he wore a tarnished badge that named him a deputy of Silver Hollow, an investigator for a town that was not entirely sure it wanted him. He brought his horse to a stop near the water trough, not looking at Clara, but seeing her. His eyes, she would learn, missed nothing. They were sharp and cold, like obsidian chips, reflecting the pale lamps without holding any of their light. He dismounted in a single fluid motion. He was taller than she had expected, lean and hard, wrapped in a blanket coat against the cold. The whispers followed him. He lived on the edge of town, near the cypress grove, his ancestral land. The talk went, cut in two by the very railroad tracks she had just arrived on. He had a son, a quiet boy of 6 named Chuli, who was rarely seen. Taza Greyhawk was, the consensus agreed, a difficult man. Hard to know, best left alone. His arrival had given Clara a moment's reprieve. The town's gaze was now split, weighing 2 outsiders at once. She took that moment to look, really look, at the town that was supposed to be her new home. It was a gash of raw wood and false fronts carved into the high desert. The social map was drawn in bold, stark lines. She could see the saloon, the largest building, spilling light and rough laughter. That would be Egan Crow's territory. His name had been in the small pamphlet the railroad distributed. A cattle baron, a man who owned the land, and more importantly, the water, a man who bent the town to his will. And the telegraph office, humming with a life of its own. That was the domain of Rutherford Hale, the railroad man. He controlled the wires, the flow of news, the promises sent east and the replies that came west. He was a spider in a web of copper. And, though she did not know it, he was the man who had built a small, profitable side business on the hopes of women like her. Between them, the general store, the small, grim mission house, and the smithy formed a kind of public square, a tribunal that passed judgment without judge or jury. Clara's gaze snagged on 2 smaller, humbler structures, almost lost in the shadow of the saloon. A sagging building with the word library painted in faded letters over the door, and further down, a simple shingle that read Dr. Reyes. They seemed quiet, out of place. She filed them away. A gust of wind, stronger this time, whipped down the tracks, throwing icy grit in her face. It stung, bringing tears to her eyes. The train was gone. The lights of its caboose had been swallowed by the immense, starless dark. The promise in her pocket, the one signed by Thomas Lang, felt as thin and brittle as the smoke that had poured from the engine. It was a ghost, a wisp of hope in a land that felt utterly, terrifyingly real. She was alone, she was cold, and no one had come to claim her. Taza Greyhawk finished watering his horse, the sound of the animal's long, deep drink echoing in the sudden quiet. He turned, his movements deliberate, and for the first time, his gaze settled directly on her. It was not a stare, not like the others. It was an acknowledgement. He saw her, a woman, alone on a platform, with the night falling fast and a hard winter on the wind. He did not speak, he simply looked, and in his eyes, Clara Ellison saw not a welcome, but a question, and in that moment, she had no answer to give him. The silence on the platform stretched, pulling thin and tight as a wire. Taza Greyhawk's gaze held Clara's, a steady, unreadable pressure. He was the first person in Silver Hollow who had looked at her as if she were a person and not a problem or a curiosity. And somehow, that was the most unsettling thing of all. Clara broke the contact first. She could not bear the weight of his attention, not on top of the cold and the fear. She had to do something. She could not just stand here and freeze. She picked up her valise, the handle slick and cold, and marched on numb feet toward the one dim light that promised officialdom, the station master's office. She knocked. The sound was flat in the vast, windy dark. After a moment, the door cracked open, spilling a stripe of sour yellow light. A man with a tobacco-stained vest and a deeply tired face peered out. "We are closed," he said, the words slurring around a wad in his cheek. "Please." Clara's voice was thin, a poor thing against the wind. "I am here to meet someone, a passenger, or he was supposed to meet me, Mr. Thomas Lang." The station master sighed, a put-upon sound, and opened the door wider. The office was small, hot, and smelled of stale cigar smoke and damp wool. No one by that name bought a ticket. No one by that name's been waiting. "He lives here," Clara insisted. Stepping inside, the sudden warmth made her shiver violently. "He has a ranch. He wrote to me. Could you please check your resident ledger? He must be listed." The man grunted. He clearly wanted her gone, but he also, it seemed, wanted to get back to his stove. Arguing would take longer than looking. He heaved himself from his stool, spat a brown stream into a brass cuspidor, and pulled a thick leather-bound book from under the counter. The cover was gray with dust. He flipped the pages, the heavy paper whispering. His finger, the nail thick and yellow, ran down a column of names: Lacey, Lambert, Lawson, Leary. He squinted. "Nope, no Lang, no Thomas, no anything." "But that is impossible," Clara said, the knot of dread in her stomach tightening into a cold stone. "He sent me this." She fumbled in her pocket, her fingers stiff and clumsy, and pulled out the creased letter. She did not offer it, but just held it, as if it were proof. The station master glanced at the letter, then at her, his eyes flat and uninterested. "Ma'am, I do not know what to tell you. This is the ledger. People come, people go. Some people," he added, with a meaningful look, "write letters about things that are not exactly true. Now, if you will excuse me." He turned his back on her, a clear dismissal, and prodded the fire in the pot-bellied stove. Clara was invisible again. She backed out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her, sealing her back into the cold. She was not aware that Taza Greyhawk had watched the entire, brief encounter. He had seen the slump of her shoulders as the door closed. He had seen her walk, unsteadily, back to the middle of the platform, as if it were the only solid ground she knew. He did not go to her, not yet. He turned and walked with his silent, measured stride to the telegraph office. The light was on. The night operator, a young man with a green eye shade and nervous hands, was on duty. Taza pushed the door open. The chatter of the telegraph key stopped abruptly. "Deputy!" the operator squeaked, standing up so fast his chair almost toppled over. Taza nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "I need to see the logs. Inbound correspondence, the last 3 months." "Sir, those are private. Mr. Hale is very particular." Taza did not move, did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the young man, and the weight of that look was enough. "I am investigating a fraud," he said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a hammer. "The logs. Now." The operator swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He pulled out a different set of books. Taza lit one of the office's lamps and carried it over. He scanned the pages. He was not looking for a name. He was looking for a pattern. He found it. A series of letters, all paid for in cash, all sent from the East, all addressed to women. And the replies, the one sent from Silver Hollow, all originated from a single box, a ghost, an empty address slot used by agreement. He had seen this before. He moved to a file cabinet, ignoring the operator's small noise of protest. He pulled a different file, one marked Labor. He opened it. Letters from a broker, promising mining jobs that did not exist. luring men who ended up indebted to Egan Crow's ranch for passage. Taza held a page from the file next to the telegraph log. The handwriting in the margins, the way the R was formed, the sharp, decisive cross of the T, it was the same. Rutherford Hale. This was not a failed romantic arrangement. This was a trap. This was human trafficking, polished with the polite language of marriage letters. This woman on the platform was not a jilted bride. She was cargo that had, for some reason, been left unclaimed. As the truth settled in Taza's mind, the world outside the window exploded. The wind, which had been a high, thin reed, became a roar. It was a physical blow. The small, hesitant flakes turned into a solid, driving wall of white. The snow did not fall. It flew sideways, erasing the world in an instant. The station lamp, the one that had been swinging, gave a terrible screech of metal on metal as a gust hit it, and its flame guttered, died, and plunged the platform into a chaos of wind and darkness. Clara cried out, a small, terrified sound that was instantly stolen by the storm. She stumbled, her feet tangled in her long skirts, the wind ripping her bonnet from her head. She was blind, disoriented, the icy needles of the snow stinging her face. Her hands, she was going to die here. The thought was sharp and clear. She had come all this way, chasing a lie, only to die alone on a train platform in a town that did not want her. A shape materialized out of the white. It was huge, solid. A hand, hard and warm, gripped her arm, steadying her. Taza Greyhawk stood before her, a shield against the wind. He had seen her fall. In 2 long strides, he was there. He said nothing. He simply unwrapped the heavy wool blanket coat from his own shoulders. It was heavy, thick, and smelled of cypress smoke, hoarse, and a clean, masculine scent she could not name. He draped it over her, pulling the collar up around her face. The weight of it was immense, a sudden, shocking burden of warmth. He bent his head, his face close to her ear so she could hear him over the shriek of the blizzard. "You stay out here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You will be a frozen body by morning." He did not ask. He did not offer. He commanded, "My house, for 3 days. We will find the truth of this." He did not wait for her answer. He turned his head, his sharp profile aimed at the blurred yellow squares of the town. The watchers were still there, hidden, but he knew they were. From the saloon, a hoot of drunken laughter cut through the wind, ugly and sharp. "Looks like the Apache is taking in the stray bride," someone yelled. Taza did not flinch. His voice, in contrast to the yell, was quiet, but it seemed to cut through the storm more effectively. He spoke into the wind, to the unseen. "Hostile town. I do not buy or sell people." His voice was dry as dust, a flat statement of fact. Then he looked back at Clara. The shadow of his hat brim obscured his eyes, but she felt the force of his gaze. She saw no pity. She saw no kindness. She saw a deep, unyielding resolve. His eyes were true. The world narrowed to this single, stark choice. She could try to go back to the station master, beg for a room, be refused. She could freeze, or she could follow this man. The train back to Kansas was not an option. It meant returning in shame, penniless, a story for the neighbors, a burden to her relations. It meant a life of quiet desperation, of, if only, of being the woman who had failed. Staying here, in this moment, was just as terrifying. But it was a different kind of terror. It was a step into the unknown, a choice. It was the immediate, solid safety of the coat on her shoulders versus the abstract, cold judgment of the town. She fumbled, her hands lost in the huge sleeves of his coat, and found the collar, pulling it tighter. Her own voice was a shred of sound, but she forced it to be firm. "I will not be a burden," she said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "I can work. I will pay for my room. I can cook. I can clean and do laundry." She thought of the small, silent boy she had heard rumors about. "The son. I can teach. I am a good teacher. I can teach your son to read and write." Taza Greyhawk looked at her for a long, silent moment. She felt as if he were weighing her. Not her body, but her spirit, her words. He seemed to find what he was looking for. He gave a single, sharp nod. He did not offer his arm. He bent, picked up her small valise in one hand, and then simply turned and began to walk, expecting her to follow. She did. She bent her head against the driving snow, clutching the heavy wool coat around her, and followed the dark, steady shape of the man who had given her a reason to stay, at least for 3 days. The cabin was at the very edge of town, where the raw lumber of Silver Hollow gave way to the ancient, dark shapes of a cypress grove. The trees moaned in the wind, but they broke its force. The cabin itself was solid, made of thick logs, with a sturdy roof and a single stone chimney breathing a steady column of smoke, which was immediately ripped away by the storm. Taza pushed the door open without a key. A wave of warmth and light washed over Clara, pulling her in. The single room was clean, orderly. A fire burned in a large stone hearth. A pot bubbled over it, smelling of venison and herbs. And by the fire, a small boy sat on a fur rug, a carving knife in his hand, a piece of wood held steady. He looked up as they entered, his eyes huge and dark, mirroring his father's. He was Cooley. He said nothing. Taza shut the door. The sound of the blizzard was instantly muffled, reduced to a dull, distant roar. The sudden silence of the room was almost as loud. Taza did not introduce her. He did not explain. He pointed with his chin toward a narrow door in the far wall, one she had not seen at first. That room, it is small, but it is warm. He walked to a hook by the door and hung up his hat. He set her valise down on the floor. He did not hand it to her. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a heavy, dark iron key. He held it out to her. She looked from the key to his face. He was giving her a key to a room inside his own house. It was a gesture of such profound and unexpected trust, or perhaps just a clear drawing of boundaries, that it stunned her. She took it. Her cold fingers brushed his warm, calloused palm. The metal was cold. "My son," Taza said, his voice softer now, no longer needing to fight the wind. "Chuli." Clara looked at the boy. He was still watching her, his small face a perfect, unreadable mask. She tried to smile, but her face felt frozen. "Hello? Chuli," she murmured. She turned back to Taza. "Thank you, Mr. Greyhawk." He did not reply. He simply turned toward the fire. He was done. Clara clutched the key and her valise and went to the small door. She opened it. The room was tiny. As he had said, a narrow cot with a neatly folded blanket, a small table, a wash basin and a pitcher. It was bare, but it was meticulously clean. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The click of the latch was a final, definitive sound. She leaned her back against the solid wood, the heavy key still clutched in her hand. The core of the conflict, the real one, had just begun. The truth of Thomas Lang was a lie that was now swirling in the storm outside. The prejudice of the town was a palpable thing. A ring of hostile lights she had just escaped. And here, in this small, warm cabin, 2 locked hearts, hers and the widower's, were now held within the same walls, separated only by a few feet of wood and a world of unspoken pain. Inside the small room, the silence was absolute. Clara stood with her back pressed to the wood, the iron key a cold, heavy weight in her palm. She could feel the cabin's life through the door, the low crackle of the fire, the scrape of a knife on wood as Chuli resumed his carving, the almost imperceptible shift of weight as Taza moved. She was inside, but she was not a part of it. She was a piece of cargo, temporarily stored. She did not sleep for a long time. She sat on the narrow cot, still wearing Taza Greyhawk's heavy coat, the scent of smoke and cypress a strange comfort. The storm raged, a living thing clawing at the log walls. But inside, the small room was quiet, secure. She listened. After what felt like hours, she heard Taza's voice, a low, resonant rumble. It was not words she could understand, but a melody, a chant. It was deep and soft, rising and falling with the rhythm of the wind outside. He was singing to his son, an Apache lullaby, ancient and full of a sadness that needed no translation. Outside, the wind found the cypress trees, and their moaning changed, harmonizing with his voice, sounding like a high, lonely flute. It was a sound of such profound sorrow and strength that it made her own small fears feel both sharp and insignificant. She was listening to the sound of a man tending to the one thing he had left. She felt like an intruder, and yet the music soothed her, pulling the tight knot of fear from her stomach. She finally lay down, pulling the blanket over her, and slept. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. It was a universe of blinding white and sharp blue. The sun on the snow was dazzling, merciless. Clara emerged from her room to find Taza gone. Chuli was at the small table, drawing with a piece of charcoal on a scrap of brown paper. He did not look up. Clara felt a surge of her old self, the competent self that knew how to work. "I promised I would earn my keep," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. Chuli continued to draw. Clara looked at the hearth. The fire was down to glowing red embers. She had never built a fire without a proper grate and bellows, but she was not going to be useless. She found the wood box. It contained logs, but also bundles of smaller, drier sticks tied with yucca fiber and a pile of what looked like dry moss. She remembered watching her grandfather start a campfire once, laying the stones just so. She studied the rocks of Taza's hearth. They were not just a pile, they were arranged, a small, tight circle in the center. She mimicked it, laying the moss, then the small, bundled sticks in a pyramid. She struck a match from the box on the mantel. The moss caught, flared, and the small, tight bundle of sticks began to smoke, then burn with a clean, hot flame. She had done it. The cabin door opened, bringing a rush of cold air. Taza stood there, his horse behind him. He looked at the fire, then at her. His face was impossible to read. "You separated the dry kindling," he said. It was not a question. "It seemed the right way," she replied, her hands clasped. He nodded once, a curt acknowledgement, and moved past her. He carried a brace of rabbits, which he began to skin with practiced, economical movements. He did not look at her again, but the test, whatever it had been, felt as if it had been passed. Just as he finished, a knock came at the door. It was not the sharp rap of authority, but a gentle, steady sound. Chuli immediately looked up, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, on his face. Taza opened the door. "Doctor," he said. Taza. The man who entered was of medium height, his hair thick and black, his skin the color of warm bronze. His face was kind, etched with the lines of a man who had seen too much but had not let it harden him. This was Dr. Reyes. He carried a black leather bag. "I heard the boys cough last week," Dr. Reyes said, his voice mild, a pleasant baritone with a soft, rolling accent from the south. "I thought the storm might settle in his chest. I brought some syrup." He turned to Clara, his eyes warm and curious, but entirely without the judgment she had felt from the town. "And you must be Miss Ellison." Clara was stunned. "You know who I am." "News travels in Silver Hollow," he said, setting his bag down, "especially when it concerns our deputy. I am Dr. Reyes. Welcome to our town, though I am sorry for the circumstances." He turned his attention to Chuli, who was now coughing, a dry, rasping sound he had clearly been trying to hide. Dr. Reyes knelt, pulling a bottle of dark syrup from his bag. He spoke to the boy in a low, gentle mix of Spanish and English. Chuli, who had been a stone wall of silence, actually answered him in a whisper. Clara watched Taza watch the exchange. The deputy's hard face softened, just a fraction, as he looked at the doctor and his son. This was a place, then, that Taza allowed kindness in. The door was not barred to everyone. Dr. Reyes gave Chuli a spoonful of medicine, patted his head, and stood. He accepted a cup of water from Taza. His eyes scanned the small cabin, resting for a moment on Clara, then on the main shelf above the hearth. Clara's eyes followed his. On the shelf sat a single, carved wooden box. It was dark, polished by time and touch, inlaid with a simple, beautiful design of a cypress branch. It was the only object in the cabin that was not purely functional. It was beautiful, and it vibrated with a sense of importance. As Dr. Reyes was leaving, he turned to Clara. "May Walsh, at the library. She is a good woman, if you need a friend." He did not say more, but the message was clear. There were two sides in this town. He had just told her which one she was on. After the doctor left, Taza began cleaning his rifle. The silence settled back in, but it was different now, filled with the new knowledge of Taza's connections. He stopped his work and looked up, his gaze locking on her. He had seen her looking at the shelf. "Do not touch the wooden box on the shelf," he said. His voice was flat, without emotion. But the order was absolute. It was a line drawn in stone. "I would not," Clara said, her cheeks warm. "It was Alawa's," he said. The name dropped into the quiet of the room like a stone into a deep well. "His wife." He said nothing more, and bent back to his work. But the air was now thick with the presence of the woman who was gone. That box held the sacred, the untouchable, the past he was not willing to let go of. Clara understood. She was a guest in a house that was already full, a house haunted not by a ghost, but by a memory. The next day, the snow had been packed down by wind and traffic. Taza told her the 3 days had begun. He had to go into town, to the telegraph office, to continue his investigation. He left Chuli with her, teach him. He ordered. Clara, desperate for provisions, knew she had to face the town. She wrapped herself in her own thin coat, leaving Taza's on its hook, and took a few coins from her valise. She stepped out onto the main street. It was worse than she imagined. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were spoken remarks, just loud enough for her to hear. The men outside the saloon grinned, their eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. But it was the women who were the cruelest. As she passed the seamstress shop, a woman with a face like a dried apple and a severe black dress stepped out onto the boardwalk, blocking her path. This was Prudence Vale, a woman whose opinions, Clara would learn, were as sharp and dangerous as her needles. "Well, well," Prudence said, her voice carrying across the street. "The little mail-order bride. I see you found a room after all, though I hear you are shacking up with the Indian." Clara froze. The street went silent. This was a public execution. "Unclaimed trash," Prudence Vale spat. "Come here to steal a widower's home from his own child. You have no shame." Clara's face burned. She had no words. She wanted to run, to disappear, to dissolve into the dirty snow. "Leave her be, Prudence." The new voice was crisp, with the lilt of Ireland in it. A woman, sturdy and with hair the color of a copper pot, stepped between them. She was May Walsh, the librarian. She carried a basket on her arm. "She has done nothing to you," May said, her blue eyes flashing. "She is an offense," Prudence snapped. "Living in sin with that Apache, it is not decent." "And it is decent to leave a woman to freeze on a platform," May shot back. "You tend to your own seams, Prudence, and leave this one to God and the law." "Go on, girl," she nudged Clara. Clara, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall, hurried past. "She will come to no good," Prudence shouted after her. Clara did not stop until she reached the sagging porch of the library. She leaned against the post, her body shaking. May Walsh came up beside her. "That one's tongue is dipped in alkali," May said, setting her basket down. "She is in Egan Crow's pocket, and he detests Taza. Pay her no mind." "Thank you," Clara whispered. May looked at her, a long, appraising look. "You are shaking, child. You are not built for this cold." She reached into her basket and pulled out a long, woolen scarf. It was a beautiful, deep shade of blue, soft and warm. "Here, you need this more than I do." "Oh, no, I could not," Clara protested. "Nonsense. It is a loan. You return it when you are settled." May wrapped the scarf around Clara's neck, her hands firm and kind. The wool was warm, like a hug. It felt, Clara thought, like a passport to dignity. "Now," May said, "what is it you came for?" In that moment, Clara's mind, which had been a swirl of fear and shame, became perfectly clear. She knew what she had to do. She would not run. She would not be unclaimed trash. "I came," Clara said, her voice steady now, "to post a notice." She spent the next hour in the quiet, dusty library with May's help. She found a clean sheet of paper and, using the library's pen, she wrote in her neatest script, schooling offered, reading, writing, arithmetic, all ages. Inquire of Clara Ellison, C.O. Taza Greyhawk. She handed the small flyer to May. May read it, and a slow, wide smile spread across her face. "Well, I will be," she said. "You are not just turning your shelter into a reason, are you? You are building a foundation." May Walsh tacked the notice to the center of the town board, right next to the sheriff's wanted posters. When Taza returned at dusk, he found the cabin warm, the stew simmering. He also found a copy of the notice on his table. He read it, his face unmoving. Clara held her breath. "This," he said, tapping the paper, "is a problem." "It is work," Clara said, standing her ground. "It is what I am good at. It is how I will pay you, and it is how I will find a place here. So I am not in your home longer than I am welcome." Taza looked at her, the dark eyes searching. He saw the blue scarf around her neck. He had heard about the confrontation with Prudence Vale. He knew what this piece of paper cost her. He said nothing. He walked to a small desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began to write. He finished, sanded the ink, and handed it to her. It was a formal declaration. "I, Taza Greyhawk, Deputy, attest that Clara Ellison is under my protection and residence for the purpose of resolving a legal matter. She is not to be harassed. The town marshal will try to run you out." Taza said, "This will stop him, but it is temporary." He pointed to the last line he had written. "For 3 days, as we agreed." He was testing her. He was testing himself. He was giving her a shield. But he was also reminding her that the shield had a limit. 3 days. Clara folded the paper. 3 days. She agreed. The tension in the cabin was thick. They were two people bound by a lie, a storm, and a piece of paper. Later that night, as the wind began to rise again, the sound of the telegraph key from town came. Fast and urgent. A runner, a boy paid a nickel, braved the cold to knock on Taza's door. He handed Taza a slip of paper. Taza read it by the light of the fire. His face tightened. Clara watched him, her heart starting to pound. "What is it?" Taza looked at her, his eyes like polished stone. He handed her the telegraph. It was short. "Message for Deputy Greyhawk. Tell your guest someone is at the saloon. He is asking to meet Thomas Lang." The bait had been laid. The trap was set. The telegraph slip was a small, flimsy thing in Taza Greyhawk's hand, but it felt as heavy as a weapon. Clara read the words, and the small, warm room seemed to tilt. Thomas Lang. The name was a ghost, and now it was a bee, sitting in the saloon, waiting for a woman who did not exist to meet a man who was a lie. "It is a trap," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "Yes." Taza's voice was flat. He looked at the message. Not at her. They know someone is asking questions. They know you did not leave. They are flushing the game. He checked the cylinder of his revolver. The metallic clicks loud in the quiet. He put the gun back in its holster. Stay here. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. He was heading for the door. No, Clara said. He stopped. He did not turn, but his whole body went still, radiating a dangerous impatience. This is not a discussion. You cannot go in there as yourself, she said, her mind working faster than it ever had before, fueled by fear and a sudden, sharp anger. They are waiting for you, but they are asking for Thomas Lang. That name is mine. That lie was told to me. I am going with you. He turned then, slowly, and his eyes were dark and cold. You will be a liability. You will get in the way. You will get hurt. And you will be shot, she countered, her voice shaking but her resolve hardening. What are you going to do? Walk in and arrest them for what for, asking a question? They will see you, the Apache deputy, and they will know their trap worked. But if I walk in, she took a breath. If I walk in, a woman, asking for the man who is supposed to meet me, what will they do then? They will have to answer. He stared at her for a long, unblinking moment. He was weighing her, not her words, but her. He was measuring her ability to break. I will not break, she said, answering his unspoken question. She walked to the hook and took down her own thin coat. She wrapped May's blue scarf around her neck. It was her armor. I will not be a liability. I will be the person they are looking for. You just be the deputy who is there to make sure I do not get cheated. A muscle worked in Taza's jaw. He did not like it, but he could not deny the cold logic of it. She was the bait. He was just the man holding the string. You do exactly as I say, he said, his voice a low growl. You do not speak unless I speak to you. You do not move unless I tell you to move. You stay 2 steps behind me. Understand? I understand, she said. The saloon was a different world from the cold. Clean night. It was a box of noise, heat, and the thick, sour smell of spilled whiskey, wet wool, and unwashed men. A piano was being badly played in the corner. A cloud of blue smoke hung in the air, thick enough to sting the eyes. When Taza pushed the bat-wing doors open, the noise, for a split second, died. Every eye turned. They saw the deputy, his badge a dull gleam on his coat, and then they saw the woman behind him, the mail-order bride, her face pale but her chin high. The piano player fumbled, then started a new, louder tune. The conversation resumed, but it was changed. It was a performance now, for the benefit of the 2 newcomers. Taza's eyes scanned the room, missing nothing. Clara kept her gaze fixed on his back, just as he had told her. He moved to the bar. The bartender, a burly man with a dirty apron, came over, wiping his hands. Deputy, he grunted, his eyes flicking to Clara and back. I am looking for a man, Taza said, his voice quiet but carrying over the noise. He is asking for Thomas Lang. The bartender's face went blank. Do not know the name. He is here, a voice slurred from a nearby table. Been here an hour, buying rounds. Clara followed Taza's gaze. At a table in the corner sat 3 miners, their faces caked with dirt. With them was a man in a flashy vest and a bowler hat tipped back on his head. He was loud, young, and had the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. This had to be Vince Calder. That is me, Calder shouted, waving a cigar. I am the man who knows everyone. Who is asking? He squinted, saw Taza, and his smile widened. Well, deputy. And the lady? He made a mocking bow from his chair. You are looking for Thomas Lang. You just missed him. He had to ride out. Urgent business. But, Calder continued, leaning in as if sharing a great secret, he left a message for the little lady. He grinned at Clara. He said he is very sorry, and he will be back in a day or 2. And he said Here he pulled a small, wadded bill from his pocket. To give you this for your trouble. To find a nice room at the hotel. He held out a $10 bill. It was an insult. It was a payoff. It was a dismissal. Clara looked at the money, then at the man. She did not move. Taza put his hand on the bar. "And you?" Taza said to Calder, his voice still quiet. "Who are you in this?" Calder laughed, leaning back. "I am just a friend, a connector. I hear about a fellow, a mine owner, needs a good wife. I hear about a lady back east, needs a good husband. I put them together. A public service. I get a small commission. Of course, just for the paperwork." "You are a matchmaker," Taza said. It was not a question. "That is it exactly," Calder beamed. "A matchmaker." As Calder was speaking, Clara's gaze drifted past him, to the side window of the saloon. It looked out on the narrow alley between the saloon and the telegraph office. For just a second, a shadow moved. The door to the back room of the telegraph office opened, and a man stood silhouetted in the light. He wore a neat suit and a hat. He was unmistakable. Rutherford Hale. He was watching. He saw them, and he stepped back, pulling the door shut. The web was not just visible, it was closing. "We are done here," Taza said. He put his hand lightly on Clara's back, a shocking, brief touch, and steered her toward the door. "Take the money," little Lady Calder called after them. "It is a cold night." They stepped out into the clean, freezing air. Clara was shaking, but with rage, not cold. "Rutherford Hale," she said, the words coming out in a white puff of breath. "He was watching. From the telegraph office. It is him. It is all him." "I know," Taza said. "He was looking down the street, at the stable. Calder is a fool. He is the muscle. Hale is the brain." "What do we do?" she asked. "I do something," Taza said. "You go back to the cabin, and you lock the door." He started to walk away. "No," she said, running to catch up. "Taza, you cannot. He is going to ride out. Calder, he is going to warn them, or he is going to wherever he is keeping." She could not finish the thought. "You are going to follow him. Go back to the cabin, Clara." "No, this is my life you are investigating. This is the man who lied to me. I am part of this. I will not be locked in a room while you hunt for my ghost. I am a witness." He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting in. He spun her around, his face a mask of cold fury. "This is not a game. These men do not just write letters. They trade in people. They will kill you and me and not think twice. You will be a body in a canyon." "And what will I be if I hide?" she shot back, her own anger matching his. "I will be the woman you rescued. I will be the mail-order bride who was left. I will be a piece of cargo. I will not. I can ride. I can be quiet. I can watch. Let me be your witness. Taza, let me be the one who sees." He stared at her, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, weary calculation. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the blue scarf that was a flag of defiance. "Stay on the horse," he said, his voice flat. "You make one sound. You get in the way, and I will tie you to a tree and leave you there. This is my land. You do what I say." He did not wait for her answer. He went to get the horses. When Clara got back to the cabin to grab a heavier coat, Chuli was awake. He was sitting by the fire, holding his charcoal. He looked at her, his dark eyes wide. He knew. He could feel the tension, the fear. He held out the piece of brown paper he had been drawing on. She took it. It was a picture. 3 stick figures, drawn with the charming, simple lines of a child. One figure was tall, standing very straight. One was small, and one was in the middle, wearing a triangle for a skirt. And over all of them, he had drawn a huge, branching tree, a cypress. Chuli got up. He walked to her. He pointed at the tall figure. "Taza," he whispered, the first words she had ever heard him speak to her. He pointed to the small figure. Truly. Then his finger moved, hesitating, to the figure in the middle. He looked up at her, a question in his eyes. Clara felt tears prick her own. She pointed to the figure. "Clara," she whispered. A slow, shy, beautiful smile lit up Chuli's face. It was a miracle. He had drawn them. He had drawn a family under the protection of the cypress. "This," she thought, clutching the drawing, "this is why I am staying. This is what I am fighting for." She tucked the drawing safely inside her coat. The ride to Copper Gulch was a nightmare of cold and shadow. The moon was a silver dollar in a black sky, making the snowfields bright as day and the canyons black as pitch. Taza moved like a ghost, his horse seeming to find its footing by magic. Clara followed, her hands numb, her body aching, but her resolve like iron. Taza held up a hand. He dismounted. Clara did the same, her legs almost collapsing. He pointed down. Not a trail, a road. The snow was churned, marked by dozens of hoof prints and the heavy tracks of a wagon. "He is not just a matchmaker," Taza said, his voice a blade in the cold. "He is a freighter." They found the camp an hour later. It was tucked into a narrow box canyon, a perfect place to hide. 2 tents and a larger, canvas-covered wagon. A single fire burned. 1 guard was visible, walking a slow, cold circle. Taza led her up the ridge. From here, they could see everything. "Stay here," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. He pressed a small, metal police whistle into her frozen hand. "Do not move from this spot." "What are you doing?" "He is just one man. I am going to talk to him." He was lying. He was going to take him. "Taza, no." "Listen to me," he said, his grip on her shoulder, gentle this time, but firm. "Dr. Reyes and May Walsh are waiting. They are at the edge of town, at the old mission. They have been waiting since we left the saloon. If you see more men, if you see more than 5, or if you hear a single shot, you blow this whistle. 3 long blasts. They will hear it. They will bring the marshal. Do you understand?" "3 blasts," she whispered, her throat tight. "Do not, Clara, do not blow it unless you have to." He was gone. He did not make a sound. He was just a darker shadow moving against the dark rocks. Clara watched, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She saw him move behind the wagon. She saw the guard stop, turn, sensing something. Taza stepped out. The guard went for his gun, but Taza was too fast. It was not a fight. It was a blur of motion. Taza had the man on the ground, his arm twisted, a hand over his mouth. In seconds, it was silent, brutal, and efficient. Clara let out a breath she did not know she was holding. And then the flap of the larger tent opened. A second man stepped out, holding a rifle, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He was stretching, as if woken by a noise. He saw them. He saw Taza on the ground with the other guard. He saw the struggle. He did not hesitate. He raised the rifle, aiming it squarely at Taza's back. There was no time. No time to think, no time to weigh the options. Clara put the frozen metal whistle to her lips and blew. She did not blow 3 times. She blew one single, piercing, desperate shriek that cut through the canyon like a hunting eagle. The man with the rifle froze. He looked up, startled, his gaze sweeping the ridge, trying to find the source of the sound. It was all Taza needed. He was on his feet, moving across the space between them before the man could re-aim. He hit the rifle, sending it spinning into a snowdrift. The fight was hand-to-hand, a blur of dark shapes, grunts, and the sound of fists on flesh. It was over quickly. Taza stood over the second man, who was unmoving. Clara scrambled down the ridge, slipping and sliding on the loose rock, tearing her coat. Taza was already cutting the horses loose, sending them scattering with a sharp slap. He moved to the wagon. He ripped open the canvas flap. Clara came up behind him, her chest heaving. Inside, in the dark, 2 women were huddled together, Their hands tied, they looked at Taza, their eyes wide with sheer terror. They saw his dark skin, his long hair, his badge, and they began to sob. "It is all right," Clara said, pushing past Taza. "We are here to help you. We are getting you out." She climbed into the wagon, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the knots on their ropes. "He told us Thomas Lang was meeting us." One of the women wept, her voice hysterical. "A rich mine owner. He said... He lied," Clara said, pulling the ropes free. "He lied to all of us." As they helped the women out of the wagon, Taza, his eyes scanning the camp, spotted something by the fire, dropped by the first guard. It was a small, leather-bound book. He picked it up. He shoved it inside his coat just as they heard the sound of approaching horses. It was Dr. Reyes and May, and behind them, the town marshal, his face a mask of sleepy confusion. Back in the warm, lamp-lit safety of Dr. Reyes's office, Taza opened the book. It was a ledger. It listed names: Clara Ellison, Mary Sutter, Ann Groden. Beside the names were dates, and beside the dates were amounts: $50, $100. And on the inside cover, stamped in faded blue ink, was a brand, a triple bar, the Crow Ranch. "Crow," Dr. Reyes said, his voice grim. "Hale gets the women, Calder handles them, and Crow sells them. To the mines, to the saloons." My God. The next day, the backlash began. The rescued women were safe with May, but the town was on fire. Prudence Vale was on the street, her voice a poison. "Did you hear she was out all night? With him, the Apache, in the canyons. What kind of decent woman does that, I told you? Seducing that poor widower, trying to steal his home. Now she has got him doing her dirty work. She has no shame." The rumor was doubly vicious. It painted Clara as a seductress and Taza as her witless, savage tool. It was a potent, ugly mix of racism and sexism. Taza went to the town council meeting that afternoon. He was calm. He laid out the evidence, the ledger, the testimony of the women, the connection to Calder and Hale. The councilmen, all of whom leased land or water from Egan Crow, listened, their faces impassive. The bank president, a man named Harris, cleared his throat. "Taza, these are serious accusations, based on the word of 2 hysterical women and a book you found." "Egan Crow is a pillar of this community," another said. "Taza, you are a good tracker," Harris said, his voice full of false kindness. "We all respect that. But this is white folks' business, complicated business. Maybe you are in a little over your head. You are speaking out of turn. You should know your place." Taza stood there for a long moment, the ledger in his hand. He looked at each man, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He said nothing. He turned, and he walked out. The message was clear: Silver Hollow would protect its own, and Taza was not one of them. Clara heard about it from May. She was furious, but she knew what she had to do. That same afternoon, she walked to the library, her head high, the blue scarf bright against her dark coat. The whispers followed her all the way. She opened the library door. She had been dreading this. She expected the room to be empty. She expected her notice to be torn down. It was not. There, sitting at a small table, were 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They looked up, their faces curious. As she stood there, the door opened again, and 2 more children came in, a brother and sister. Their father was a brakeman on the railroad. Then came the saloon keeper's son, a boy with eyes too old for his face. By the time she rang the small bell May had given her, she had 7 pupils. Chuli sat in the back corner, his charcoal and paper in hand, a silent, proud guardian of this new, fragile thing. Clara stood in front of them. She looked at their eager, waiting faces. The town could whisper. The council could protect its monsters. But this was real. "Good afternoon, class," she said, her voice clear and strong. My name is Miss Ellison, and today we are going to learn how to read. May Walsh, from behind her big desk, watched the scene. She had a broad, fierce smile on her face. The rumor was a wildfire, but Clara had just lit a match of her own, and it was starting to catch. The children in Clara's class were a small, bright fire against the town's cold shoulder, but the town's judgment was nothing compared to the cruelty of the high desert. The false spring, which had melted some of the snow, vanished overnight. It was replaced not by a clean, honest blizzard, but by a monster. A wind rose from the south, smelling of dust, of alkali, of a million years of drought. It hit Silver Hollow and met the cold air from the north. The result was a suffocating, gritty, freezing fog, a storm of ice and sand. Snow fell, but it was brown. The air was full of grit that stung the eyes and caked the lips. For 2 days, the sun was a dirty thumbprint in a gray-brown sky. The wind howled, a high, screaming madness. And then, silence. The railroad was stopped. The telegraph lines were down, snapped by the weight of ice and the lash of wind. The train that brought supplies, that brought the mail, that brought connection to the outside world, did not come. Silver Hollow was an island, cut off, and its supplies were dwindling. The general store, which had seemed so full, suddenly looked bare. Prices doubled. A sickness of the spirit, a panic, began to set in. In Taza Greyhawk's cabin, the small store of flour and dried venison was running low. Clara, who had lived with scarcity her whole life, took charge. She was not a guest. She was not a refugee. She was a partner in survival. She measured the flour for the day's bread, half portions. She made a thin, watery but hot stew from the last of the rabbit and some dried roots Taza had kept. She had to keep Chuli's mind off his rumbling stomach. She had to keep her own off it. The school and the library was closed by the storm, so she taught him in the cabin. He was a bright boy, his mind a quick, sharp trap for shapes and sounds. He had mastered the letters of his own name, and Taza's, now. He sat beside her on the floor, the firelight warm on his face, his piece of charcoal poised over a plank of wood. What else, he whispered. He was talking more, in small, shy bursts. Clara looked at Taza, who was at the table, mending a piece of harness, his hands strong and sure. His back was to them, but she knew he was listening. She made a choice. She took the charcoal from Chuli. "This," she said, her voice soft, "is a very important name." She formed the letters, slowly, clearly, L-S-W-A. Chuli looked at the shapes. Alawa, he sounded out, the name foreign and familiar on his tongue. He looked up at her, his eyes full of a child's simple need to know. "Who is Alawa?" "She was your mother," Clara said, her throat tight. At the table, Taza's hand stopped. The leather and the awl rested, unmoving. He did not turn around. He just sat, his back a rigid wall. "My mother," Chuli repeated. He had no memory of her, only the sacred, untouchable box on the shelf. He looked at the letters, as if they were magic. A key. He took the charcoal and, on his own piece of wood, he began to copy the name. A-L-A-W-A. He wrote it and wrote it again, his small, dark hand steady, claiming the word. Taza turned. His face was a mask, carved from the same hard wood as the shelf. He looked at Clara, and his eyes were a storm of their own. He was in pain. She had taken a stone from that deep well of his grief and held it up to the light. He had seen her teach his son the name that was forbidden, the name that was his alone to mourn. But he was not angry. He watched Chuli write, and the pain in his eyes was joined by something else, a warmth, a gratitude so deep it was almost as painful as the grief. Clara had not just taught his son to write a name. She had given him back a piece of his mother. She had honored the ghost in the room, given her a place to sit, welcomed her to the fire. Taza picked up his harness and, His hands no longer steady, resumed his work. The storm broke, and the world outside thawed into a sea of mud. The telegraph lines were patched, and the town, hungry for news, found its old ruts. May Walsh found hers in the dusty back room of the library. The rescued women, Mary and Anne, were staying with her, sleeping on cots, helping her sort. "Look at this, Miss Ellison," May said, when Clara came to reopen the school. May held up a stack of old donation letters from women back east who had sent books. "The handwriting," May said, her finger tracing a loop on a letter from 3 years ago. A woman who was coming to meet a brother. She sent books ahead. She never arrived. May pulled out another, from a different year, a teacher coming for the mission school. She, too, had vanished. "Now," May said, her voice grim, pulling out one of the letters sent to Clara. "Look, the signature is Thomas Lang. But look at the T. Look at the way the S leans." Clara looked. The T was the same. The S was the same. It was not just her. It was not just Mary and Anne. It was a network, a business, running for years. "How many?" May Clara whispered, the cold of the muddy street seeping into the room. "God only knows. Child," May said. "God only knows." The conspiracy had roots. The other side knew it too. And they were beginning to move against the threat. Rutherford Hale approached Clara outside the general store. He was not a brute like Calder or Crow. He was a snake, sleek and civilized. He tipped his hat, his smile all smooth, polished teeth. "Miss Ellison," he said, his voice a reasonable, pleasant baritone. "A word, if I may." Clara, holding her small bag of precious, overpriced flour, stopped. She looked him in the eye. This was the man who had written the letters. This was the spider. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice cold and clear, "I have been watching your situation with great concern," he said, his own eyes full of false sympathy. "You are a woman of education, of refinement. This arrangement you have with the deputy, it is not fitting. The town is talking. It is damaging your reputation." "My reputation is my own concern," Clara said. "But is it?" he smiled, leaning in. "Opportunity is scarce, Miss Ellison, and reputation is currency. I am the man who controls the telegraph. I am the man who controls the flow of information." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "I am in need of an operator, someone with a quick mind and good penmanship, someone I can trust. The job pays well. It would give you a stable position, a respectable position. It would, in effect, stabilize your entire status here. You would be one of mine, a different kind, but just as deadly. Work for him, be silent, be complicit, be his." Clara looked at his manicured hands, his clean suit. She thought of the women in the wagon. She thought of the names in May's files. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Hale," she said, her voice ringing on the boardwalk. "But I am not for hire, and I am not for sale. I prefer to keep my status exactly where it is." She walked away, leaving him on the boardwalk, his smile frozen, his eyes suddenly as cold and hard as a winter snake's. She had not just refused him. She had declared war. The war escalated that same afternoon. Taza was checking the boundary of his land, the land that held the cypress grove, and, more importantly, the spring. It was the only clean water on this side of the ridge. Egan Crow had coveted it for his cattle for years. A man on a horse. One of Crow's men was there, his horse drinking from the spring. "Your horse is on my land," Taza said, his voice even. The man, a rough-looking drifter with a gun on his hip, spat a stream of tobacco. "This is Crow land, or it will be. He is tired of you Indians squatting on water that belongs to white men." "This is not Crow land," Taza said, his hand resting near his own holster. "Move your horse." The man laughed. A short, ugly sound. Or what? Apache, You going to file a complaint with your council buddies?" He pulled his horse's head up, turned, and began to ride away. Then, in a movement so fast it was almost an accident, he drew his pistol and fired. The shot was not at Taza. It was beside him. The bullet splintered the top of a wooden fence post that marked the property line, sending a piece of cypress flying. It was a warning, a promise. Taza did not move, did not flinch, until the man was a small dot on the horizon. Then he bent, slowly, and picked up the hot, lead-splattered piece of wood. That night, Dr. Reyes came. He did not knock. He slipped in, his face grim in the firelight. "Egan Crow is done asking. Taza," he said, his voice low, for Taza's ears only. But Clara heard. She was mending one of Chuli's shirts, and her hands went still. "He is moving men, a dozen of them, armed," Dr. Reyes said. "He is not just going to run his cattle. He is going to take the spring. He is moving them into the cypress grove at dawn." The cypress grove, the sacred place, the grove that held Alawa's memories, the grove that Taza had drawn his strength from, the grove that protected his home. "He is coming for your house. Taza," Dr. Reyes said. "He is coming for your land, and he will not let you or your boy or Miss Ellison stand in the way." The air in the cabin was so thick, Clara could not breathe. This was it. The violence was no longer a threat. It was an appointment. After Dr. Reyes left, the silence was terrible. Taza stood by the fire, staring into the flames. He was a man cornered. The law, his badge, was useless. The council had turned their backs. The town was against him. He was one man, with a woman and a child, against a dozen armed guns. Clara got up. She did not know what to say. "Taza." He turned. He walked to a small chest, opened it, and took something out. He came to her. He pressed something into her hand. It was cold, heavy. It was a knife, a small one, but perfectly balanced. The blade was dark, sharp. The handle was made of carved cypress wood, worn smooth by a hand. It was carved with the delicate, branching pattern of a cypress flower. It was a work of art. It was a tool. It was a weapon. "I do not know how to," she whispered, staring at it. "It is not for fighting," Taza said, his voice a low rumble, his thumb brushing the carved wood. "It is for cutting, to cut bindings, to cut ropes. If they tie you up, you do not let them take you." He was giving her a tool for a possibility so terrible she had not dared to imagine it. He was not giving her a gun. He was giving her something deeper, something from his own world. This was trust. This was a partnership in a way that scared her more than Hale's offer or Crow's threats. This was comrades. She closed her hand around the cypress handle. It fit her palm as if it were made for her. "I will not let them take me," she said. The weight of the day, of the threats, of the fear, was too much. The night before the battle, the body gives up. Clara, who had been running on pure nerve and adrenaline for days, suddenly felt the floor tilt. The room swam, the firelight blurring, the small rations, the endless cold, the terror. It all came crashing down. "Taza," she whispered, and the world went black. She did not hit the floor. He caught her. He was there, his arms around her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She woke to the smell of something bitter and hot. She was in her own cot. She was burning. A fever, sharp and bright, was raging through her. She was shivering, though the room was hot. Taza was beside her, kneeling on the floor. He held a steaming cup. "You are sick," he said. The words were simple. A statement. "You have been running too hard. You are exhausted." "Chuli," she murmured, trying to sit up. "He is asleep. He is safe." Taza's hand, the one that was not holding the cup, came up and pushed her gently back down. "Drink this." She looked at the dark liquid. "Willow bark," he said. "My mother's tea. For the fever." She was too weak to argue. He lifted her head with one arm, his strength effortless, and held the cup to her lips. She drank. It was bitter, but it was warm, and it felt like life. She lay back, her head spinning. The fever was making her see things, feel things. His hand, as he pulled the blanket up to her chin, was calloused, rough, but his touch was gentle. "I am so cold," she whispered, her teeth chattering. He went to the basin. He dipped a cloth in the cold water, wrung it out, and came back. He sat on the edge of the cot. The small room was barely big enough for the cot. And now for him. He was too large for this space, his presence overwhelming. He placed the cool, damp cloth on her forehead. She sighed, the relief of it so profound it was almost painful. Her eyes closed. "Taza," she whispered. "I am here," he said. "I am afraid." "I know." He said, "Sleep. The fever will break." He sat with her. He did not move. He watched her shiver. He watched the fever burn in her cheeks. He watched her fight. He looked at his own hand, the one that had held the cloth. It was trembling. Not from cold, not from fear. He was a man who had lost everything. He had built a wall of ice and silence around his heart, around his son. He had let no one in, not Dr. Reyes, not May, and now this woman, this stranger, this piece of mail-order cargo, had walked through his door and had not left. She had brought a storm with her, but she had also brought a strange, quiet, terrible light. She had taught his son his mother's name. She had faced down the town. She had refused. She was holding a knife he had carved for his wife, and she had collapsed in his arms. The lines were not blurred. They were gone. He was terrified, not of Crow, not of the guns, but of the feeling that was rising in his chest, a feeling he thought had been buried, frozen solid, with Alawa. He sat there all night. He changed the cloth. He made her drink more tea. He did not sleep. In the gray, cold light of dawn, the fever broke. Clara woke. The cabin was utterly silent. The light was pale, thin. She was weak, her body aching, but her mind was clear. The fever was gone. Taza was slumped in the corner, his head against the wall, asleep. He was still sitting up, his rifle across his knees. He had been guarding her, guarding the cabin, waiting for the dawn. She sat up, slowly. The movement made him snap awake. His eyes were instantly clear, sharp, alert. He was on his feet in a single motion, the rifle ready. He saw her. He saw her eyes, clear and sane. He saw the fever was gone. "You are back," he said. "I am back," she whispered. He did not know what to do. The relief was a physical blow, making him weak. He had sat all night watching her, thinking she, too, might be taken from him. Another woman stolen by this God-forsaken land. And now she was looking at him, her eyes wide, her face pale. But she was alive. He crossed the small room in one step. He did not plan it. He did not think. He just moved. He reached down, and he put his arms around her, pulling her up from the cot. He held her. It was not the hug of a lover. It was the hug of a survivor. It was the hug of two people who had been to the edge and had not fallen. It was warm. It was solid. She buried her face in his rough shirt, smelling the smoke and the willow and the man himself. She felt his heart, beating a strong, steady rhythm against her. He held her tight, his hand on her back, his other hand in her hair, just holding her, grounding himself. It lasted only a moment, 5 heartbeats, 10. Then he let her go, his hands gentle on her shoulders, setting her back. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were raw. Outside, the sun was rising, and in the cypress grove, a dozen men were checking their guns. The day of the fight had come. The fragile warmth of the embrace shattered, replaced by the cold, gray light of dawn. The reality of the day came crashing in Egan Crow. A dozen armed men. The cypress grove. Taza set Clara back, his face hardening, the brief vulnerability gone, replaced by the mask of the scout. The deputy. The fever is gone, but you are weak. I am not weak, Clara said, pushing her hair back from her damp forehead. Her legs felt like hollow reeds, but her voice was iron. I am not staying here to be protected. Your fight is at the spring, but your war is in the town. You cannot fight Crow's men and Prudence Vale's tongue at the same time. You need a witness. I am going with you. You will be a target. I am already a target, she retorted. Hiding in this cabin just makes me an easier one. She was already dressing, pulling on her heavy skirts, her hands shaking but her movements sure. She would not be left behind. Not again. He saw the resolve in her, a mirror of his own. He nodded once, a sharp, grim motion. He woke Chuli, who dressed in the same silent, serious way. They were a strange, sad army. The three of them, Taza with his rifle, Clara, pale and unsteady but her eyes burning, and the small, silent boy who had forgotten how to laugh. They walked into Silver Hollow. The town was awake, and it was waiting. This was not a normal day. This was a day of reckoning. The air was heavy, still, the sky a bruised leaden gray. They reached the main street. It was not an accident. It was a performance, staged and ready. As they passed the seamstress shop, the door flew open. Prudence Vale stepped out, her face a knot of pure, distilled malice. Behind her, on the boardwalk, lounging against a post, was Egan Crow. He was smiling, a slow, satisfied smile, as if watching his favorite play. Men from the saloon, women from the general store, they all stopped. A crowd formed, a circle, an arena. There she is! Prudence's voice was a shriek that cut the gray air. The mail-order bride who could not even keep a man, the woman who shares a bed with a savage while his good wife is barely cold in the ground. The crowd murmured. It was a vicious, ugly sound. Clara stopped, her hand flying to her throat. She could feel the fever's weakness rising, her knees threatening to buckle. She comes here, Prudence continued, stepping closer with her fake Eastern manners, and she bewitches him, seducing that poor widower, trying to steal his land, his home. She is a whore, the Apache's whore. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. She staggered. Chuli, terrified, hid behind Taza's legs. Before Clara could fall, before she could even find her breath, Taza moved. He did not go to her. He stepped past her, directly into Prudence Vale's path. A wall of cold. Contained fury. He was not the widower. He was not the Apache. He was the law. His voice was not loud. It did not have to be. It cut through the crowd's noise like a razor. Prudence Vale, you will be silent. The woman, so full of her own venom, actually recoiled. Taza stepped into the center of the circle. He was not looking at Prudence. He was looking at the crowd, at all of them. You speak of shame, he said, his voice ringing with a cold, clear authority they had never heard from him. Let us speak of it. You whisper about this woman. You judge her. But you do not whisper about Mary Sutter. You do not whisper about Anne Groden. You do not whisper about the teacher from Flagstaff who came to the mission and never arrived. You do not ask where the women who answer Rutherford Hale's letters go, when the Thomas Lang who summons them never appears. A different silence fell, a heavy, guilty, frightened silence. These were not rumors. These were names. Names they had forgotten. Names they had chosen to ignore. Taza had defended her with the law. He had turned their judgment back on them. Now, Clara, her hand still pressed to her chest, found her own strength. She would not let him stand alone. She stepped out from behind him. She was pale, still shimmering with the ghost of the fever, but her eyes were clear. She was not looking at Prudence. She was looking at the brakeman, at the saloon keeper, at the mothers who had eyed her with suspicion. "I did not come to Silver Hollow for a man I had never met," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength with every word. "I came here for a home, a place to be safe, a place to be useful." She shook her head, a small, sad movement. "I am not staying because of a letter. That letter was a lie. I am staying because your children deserve a school. I am staying." She turned and reached back, her hand finding Chuli's small, cold one, pulling him gently to her side, because a little boy deserves to learn his mother's name and to remember how to laugh. The raw honesty of it, the simple, undeniable truth, hit the crowd harder than Taza's anger. This was not a whore. This was a teacher. This was a woman protecting a child. Several of the women in the crowd looked away, their faces hot with shame. The moment was hers. It was theirs. Egan Crow shattered it. From the boardwalk, he began to clap, a slow, loud, mocking applause that echoed in the heavy air. "Bravo!" he boomed, pushing himself off the post. He strode into the street, his heavy boots stirring the dust. A beautiful speech. "Ma'am, truly touching." He smiled, a predator's smile. This little performance. It is charming, but it does not change the law." He turned his full, bullish attention on Taza. The smile was gone. "And as for you, deputy, you are through. I am filing a formal suit against you with the territorial court, as of this morning." He ticked the points off on his thick fingers. 1 obstruction of my legal business, 2 criminal harassment of my employees, 3 blocking access to a public water route for my cattle. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl that the whole crowd could still hear. "I will have your land. Indian, I will have that spring. I will have your badge. And I will see you, and this woman, and your half-breed boy run out of this territory." The threat was absolute, legal, final. The town's social code versus the ironclad power of territorial law. As if summoned by the conflict, the door to the telegraph office clicked open. Rutherford Hale stepped out. He was, as always, immaculate. He held a freshly typed telegraph slip in his hand. He looked at the scene Crow, Taza, Clara, the divided crowd, and he smiled. "Such passion on this gray morning," he said. He nodded to Crow, a small, Confederate gesture. Then he looked at Taza. "Trouble. Deputy, do not you worry. The railroad. We take threats to our operations very seriously. We cannot have instability in our towns." He held up the slip of paper. "I have just sent a message. I have summoned a contingent of our own security from the head office. They will be here on the next train just to ensure stability, to protect railroad property and railroad interests. I am sure you understand." The bee was now a vice. Crow would take Taza's land with the law. Hale would take the town with his own army. The sky above them seemed to darken another shade, a low, leaden ceiling pressing down. The crowd felt it, the combined power of the cattle baron and the railroad man. It was an unholy alliance, and it was unbeatable. Then, a new sound, the scrape of a chair. Dr. Reyes had dragged a seat from his office onto his small porch. He sat down, calmly, and began to clean his spectacles, his eyes never leaving Taza. Across the street, the library door opened. Mae Walsh stepped out, her arms crossed, her red hair a flag of defiance. She stood on her top step. They said nothing. They did not have to. A few people in the crowd, those who had been neutral, whose children were in Clara's class, shifted. The brakeman moved his family a few feet closer to the library. The saloon keeper's son, surprisingly, moved to stand near Dr. Reyes's porch. The street, which had been a circle, was now a line. The town had split in two. Taza saw it. He saw his allies. He saw his enemies. He knew the fight in the grove was now inevitable. a distraction from this larger war. But he also knew he had to set a trap of his own. He put his hand on Chuli's shoulder. "We are going home," he said. He looked at Clara. He did not offer her his arm. He did not have to. They walked, the three of them, back through the silent, divided crowd. And this time, no one whispered. Back in the cabin, the tension was a living thing. Chuli, his small face tight with a fear he could not voice, went to his corner and began to draw. Frantic, dark lines on his paper. Taza moved with a grim, new purpose. He was not just a man defending his home. He was a hunter laying a snare. He went to the shelf, to the carved wooden box. Clara held her breath. She had never seen him touch it. His hand, which had been so steady with his rifle, trembled as he unlatched it. He opened the lid. The cabin filled with the faint, sweet, dry scent of cypress and memory. He reached inside. He did not take out a weapon. He took out a small, folded piece of cloth. It was a sash, a belt, woven from dark wool and embroidered with the most beautiful, intricate pattern of cypress flowers. The colors a deep sky blue, a vibrant, living green still bright as the day they were stitched. He held it for a moment, his face a mask of such profound grief that Clara had to look away. "It was Alawa's," he said, his voice thick. She wore this for the dances, for the birth of our son." He turned. He held it out to Clara. "Taza, no, I cannot," she whispered, her hands rising in protest. "She would want it," he said, his voice rough. "She was a fighter, too." He pressed it into her hands. The cloth was soft, warm, to keep you safe, to keep the house safe, to keep Chuli safe. He was not just giving her a token. He was entrusting her with his wife's memory. He was blending the past with the present, asking one woman's spirit to protect another. Clara, her eyes stinging with tears, took the sash and tied it around her waist, over her plain dress. The bright, beautiful colors were a sudden, shocking line of life against the drab wool. Taza's focus shifted. He was all business now. "Crow's men are in the grove. That is a feint. He is using them to draw me out, to make it look like a fair fight over land. But the real move, that is at Copper Gulch." He grabbed a small pouch from the wall, filled with a bright, red ochre pigment. He is using the fight as a diversion. He and Hale are moving a new wagon of goods. More women, more tricked men tonight. His supplies are at the edge of his property. He is arrogant. He leaves a trail. "What are you going to do?" Clara asked. "I am going to give the law something it cannot ignore." He tucked the pouch inside his shirt. "I am going to mark his supplies, a sign of my people, a mark that I will show the marshal when I am done. That means trafficker, a mark that proves those barrels of flour are not for his cattlemen. They are for his prisoners. He wants a war, he will have one, but on my terms, with my weapons." He picked up his rifle. He was ready. He looked at Clara, at the pale, brave woman standing by his hearth, wearing his wife's colors. He had to say it. He had to give voice to the great, terrible fear that was bigger than a dozen guns. The words were torn from him, raw and unpolished. "Clara, I am more afraid of this, of loving again, than I am of dying out there in that grove." She looked at him, her face pale, but her eyes steady and clear. She had the knife he gave her at her belt. She had his wife's sash at her waist. She reached into her pocket and her fingers found the small, creased drawing Chuli had made, the three of them under the cypress tree. "I know," she said, her voice quiet, "but as strong as the log walls around them. But you are not alone in that grove, and I am not in this cabin by accident. I am here." She took a step closer to him. "I am here by choice." He held her gaze for one long, silent beat. The fear was still there, in his eyes, but now it was met by her strength. He nodded, once. He touched Chuli's head, a brief, fierce caress. Then he slipped out the door, a shadow vanishing into the lead-gray afternoon, heading for the grove. and for the war. Taza did not go to the cypress grove. That was a story for Egan Crow's spies. The moment he left the cabin, he circled wide, a shadow moving through the arroyos, his feet making no sound on the gravel. He had marked Crow's supply wagon, the one sitting exposed at the edge of the ranch, with the stark, red ochre symbol of his people, a sign that meant Coyote, the trafficker. Then, he had vanished. He met his real army at the mouth of the draw, a mile from the town. It was a small, strange force. Dr. Reyes was there, his black bag not with medicines, but with heavy, oiled ropes. May Walsh, her red hair tied back, carried a long-range rifle from the library's back office, a relic of her late husband's. With them were the 3 townsfolk who had chosen aside the quiet brakeman, who knew how to move heavy things, and the saloon keeper with his grown son, both of whom had seen too much of Crow's business and had finally found a line they would not cross. Clara arrived last, Chuli's small, cold hand in hers. She had not been able to leave him. May saw this, and her face, hard with resolve, softened. "I will take him. Child," she said, "I will take him back to the library. We will bar the door. Prudence Vale herself could not get through it. He will be safe." Clara knelt, the cypress sash bright at her waist. She looked into Chuli's dark, terrified eyes. "I am going to help your father," she said. "I will be back." She pressed his small drawing into his hand. "You be brave. You keep May safe." He did not cry. He just nodded, his small face a perfect, miniature copy of his father's stoic mask. He took May's hand. Just then, a rider came hard from the east, one of Dr. Reyes's contacts. "They are moving. The big wagon. It just left the Beeline Junction. It is heading for Copper Gulch. Now." The time was upon them. Taza looked at his small group. 6 against he did not know how many. "This is not a gunfight," he said, his voice low and sharp in the pre-dawn chill. "This is a rescue. We are ghosts. We create chaos. We get the women. We get the proof. We do not get shot." He laid out the plan. It was simple. It was Apache. Use the land. Copper Gulch was a box. One way in, one way out. Taza's team split. The saloon keeper and his son took the horses and rode to the high ridge to start a small, controlled rock slide, enough to block the canyon's exit, to bottle them in. Dr. Reyes and the brakeman took the ropes and circled to the west, to a narrow place in the trail. Taza, Clara, and May crept to the canyon's entrance. In the gray light, they could see the camp, one large canvas-topped wagon, a smaller supply wagon, a fire, and at least 6 guards, not counting Hale or Crow, who were already there, arguing by the smaller wagon. "Now," Taza whispered. He and May lit the bundles they had made, damp sagebrush, wrapped in oil-soaked rags. The smoke did not rise. It was heavy, acrid, and green. It poured down the small incline, silent as water, pooling in the bottom of the gulch, choking and blind. A man coughed. "What in the hell?" Under cover of the first surge of smoke, Taza moved. He did not run. He flowed. A guard stepped out of the haze, his eyes watering, and Taza was on him. Not with a gun, with a rope, a loop, a twist, a silent, brutal takedown. The man was on the ground, bound and gagged, before he even understood the attack. Clara was right behind him, her heart a hammer against her ribs, the cypress-handled knife cold in her hand. The smoke was thick, stinging her eyes. But she did not stop. She heard a whimper. It was close. From the large wagon. Another guard burst from the tent, rifle raised. He was blinded by the smoke, turning in circles. May Walsh, from her perch, did not shoot him. She fired at the rock face 3 feet above his head. The bullet sang, and chips of granite stung the man's face. He cried out, dropped his rifle, and covered his eyes. That was Clara's chance. Taza was busy with a third guard. This was her move. She ran to the big wagon, her lungs burning, and scrambled up the heavy wheel. She slashed at the canvas with a knife. It was thick, but the blade was sharp. She tore a long, ragged hole and tumbled inside. It was dark. It smelled of fear and hay. 4 women were huddled in the back, their wrists bound with rope. They looked at her, their eyes wide and white with terror. "Be quiet," Clara gasped, coughing. "We are here to help you." She grabbed the first woman's hands. "The knife, it was made for this." She sawed at the ropes. 1 cut, 2, the woman was free. She started on the next. She was a woman possessed, a fury of quiet, desperate action. Outside, the chaos was complete. The rock slide thundered down at the far end of the canyon, sealing the exit. The smoke was a wall. Men were shouting, confused. And then Rutherford Hale lost his nerve. "It is an attack. It is the Apache," he screamed. He saw the wagon canvas moving. He saw the shapes of the women inside. "They are loose. Stop them." He pulled his elegant, pearl-handled pistol and began firing, shooting wildly into the wagon, into the smoke, not caring who or what he hit. Egan Crow saw the entire plan, his entire network, dissolving into chaos. He was not a coward, but he was a pragmatist. He saw Taza fighting a guard near the fire. He shoved Hale. "You fool," he roared. He did not run for the blocked exit. He knew another way. He ran up toward the back of the canyon, toward the black, skeletal timbers of the abandoned Morning Star mine. There was a trestle, a rotten bridge, but it led to the far ridge. It was his escape. Taza saw him. He left the guard on the ground and pursued. A silent, dark shadow, his rifle in his hands. The chase was short, and it was vertical. Crow, heavy but powerful, scrambled up the scree slope. Taza, light and certain, was right behind him. They reached the bridge. It spanned a ravine so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. It was a skeleton of wood, the planks warped and missing. Crow was halfway across when Taza reached the edge. The cattleman turned, trapped, his chest heaving. "This is my land, Indian," he snarled, pulling a long, glittering skinning knife from his belt. "I will kill you for this." Taza stopped. He stood at the edge of the bridge. He could have raised his rifle. He could have shot the man where he stood. It would have been easy. It would have been just... He did not. He lowered the rifle. He let it rest at his side. He stepped onto the bridge. The wood groaned under his weight. "This is not your land." "Crow," Taza said, his voice calm, carrying in the sudden, high stillness. "And I am not a killer. I am the law." Crow roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and he lunged. The fight was brutal. It was not a duel. It was a brawl. Crow was a bull, all weight and force, slashing with the knife. Taza was a whip, all speed and leverage, using his rifle as a staff, blocking, turning, letting the man's own weight betray him. The bridge swayed and groaned under them. A plank splintered. Crow lunged, a wild, desperate slash aimed at Taza's throat. Taza sidestepped. Crow, his momentum unchecked, his heavy boot catching on a warped board, overbalanced. He flailed, the knife flying from his hand, spinning down into the blackness. He grabbed for the rotten side railing. It splintered. It gave way. With a high, terrified scream, Egan Crow fell. Taza, moving with a speed that defied thought, dropped his rifle, lunged, and caught him. He grabbed a single, thick wrist. Crow dangled over the abyss, his heavy body a dead weight, his face just feet below Taza's, a mask of purple, choking terror. "Pull me up," he gurgled. "For God's sake, pull me up, you savage." Taza held him. His arms screamed with the strain. He looked down into the eyes of the man who had tried to ruin him, to kill him, to take his land, to steal his honor. He could open his hand. It would be so easy. A simple relaxation of his fingers. It would be the end. He thought of Clara's face, pale from the fever. He thought of his badge, heavy in his pocket. He thought of Alawa, who had hated the taste of revenge. He did not open his hand. He set his feet, gritted his teeth, and with a low, primal groan, he began to pull. It was a terrible, slow, agonizing retrieval. He hauled the heavy man up, hand over hand, until Crow, sobbing and choking, could get his boot on a beam. Taza dragged him onto the relative safety of the bridge. The moment Crow's chest hit the planks, Taza was on him, his knee in the man's back, pulling his arms into place. The sound of the iron handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound in the canyon. Justice, not revenge. Back in the gulch, the fight was ending. Just as Clara got the last woman free, Hale's wild shooting found a mark. A bullet tore through the canvas, ricocheted off the wagon's iron wheel brace. The wagon, already unstable on the uneven ground, shivered, groaned, and with a terrible scraping sound, it began to tip over. "Jump!" Clara screamed, shoving the women out. One girl, the last one, stumbled. She fell, and the wagon's heavy side came down, pinning her leg under the wreckage. Clara, without thinking, rushed forward, trying to lift the heavy side. May ran to help. Hale, his face a mask of sweat and terror, saw them. He saw the witnesses. He raised his pistol, taking careful aim at Clara. "Clara, look out!" Dr. Reyes shouted, "running from the smoke!" Clara turned. She saw Hale. She saw the gun. She did not duck. She did not run. She grabbed May and the trapped girl and threw herself over them, shielding them with her own body, with the bright, cypress-embroidered sash. The world exploded. Not a gunshot, a blow. As she had moved, the wagon's remaining cargo, a heavy crate, had shifted, and it fell, catching her. The sharp, wooden edge hit her shoulder. A sound of splintering wood and a dull, sickening thud. A pain, white-hot and bright, shot through her. She cried out, a sharp, broken sound, but she did not move. She stayed, covering the women, until she heard the brakeman and Dr. Reyes at her side, lifting the wreckage, pulling the trapped girl free. And then, as if the land itself was sighing, a cold, light rain began to fall. It was not a storm, it was a whisper. It pattered on the canvas, on the rocks, on their faces. It turned the acrid smoke to a harmless, clean steam, dousing the sagebrush fires. Nature, it seemed, was washing the canyon clean. "You are hit," Dr. Reyes said, his voice grim. He was at her side, his hands probing her shoulder. "No, I am just cut," Clara gasped, the words catching in her throat. The pain was a living thing, breathing in her arm. He ripped the sleeve of her dress, the one she had arrived in. The gash was deep, from her collarbone to her shoulder, the wood having torn a path, and it was bleeding, a dark, pulsing flow that stained Alawa's sash a deeper crimson. "My God, it will need stitches." Just then, Taza returned, pushing a cuffed, mud-stained, and utterly broken Egan Crow in front of him. As Crow stumbled over a rock, 2 items fell from his coat, landing at Taza's feet. Taza stopped. He bent down. He picked them up. One was the small, leather-bound ledger from Copper Gulch, the one he had seen before. The other was a packet of papers, bound with a ribbon, stamped with the unmistakable brand of the Crow Ranch. He looked at Crow. The proof. At that exact moment, a thunder of hooves echoed from the canyon entrance. A dozen men, armed to the teeth, wearing the uniforms of the railroad security, rode in. They were the men Hale had summoned. They galloped in, guns drawn, expecting to find a massacre, an Apache uprising. They stopped. This is what they saw. They saw Rutherford Hale, their boss, his face white, his smoking pistol still in his hand. They saw the most powerful man in the territory, Egan Crow, in handcuffs, his face a mask of dirt and defeat. They saw Taza Greyhawk, his badge gleaming in the rain. holding the evidence. They saw Dr. Reyes, May Walsh, and 3 other respected townsfolk, armed and ready. And they saw 4 crying, terrified women, being comforted by May. And then they saw Clara, bloodied from head to foot, her arm being bandaged by the doctor, but standing on her own, her eyes blazing with a fire that had nothing to do with fever. The railroad men looked at Hale. They looked at the scene. The narrative they had been sold, the lie of the savage, had just shattered against the rock-hard truth. Hale's power, his authority, his very world, evaporated in the cold, wet air. They found a small, dry cave under an overhang to get out of the wind, a place to tend the wounded and hold the prisoners until a wagon could be brought. The rain was falling harder now. Clara was shivering violently, the shock setting in. "It has to be stitched." "Taza," Dr. Reyes said. He held out the small, curved needle and the gut thread. "My hands are too big, and they are shaking. She is too cold. You do it. Your hands are steady." Taza looked at the needle. He looked at Clara. His hands were not steady. They were stained with dust and grime, and they were shaking. He, who had just faced a man on a rotting bridge, was terrified of this small needle. He knelt in front of her. He took the needle. He took the antiseptic from the doctor's bag and began to clean the wound. His touch, as he wiped away the blood, was impossibly gentle. "Be still," he murmured. It was a command as much to himself as to her. He took a breath. He pushed the needle into her skin. Clara gasped, a sharp intake of breath, but she did not cry out. She watched his face. He was closer than he had ever been. She could feel his breath on her cheek. She could smell the smoke, the rain, the fight, and the man. He was all animal, all man, and at this moment, all tenderness. He worked, his brow furrowed, his entire soul focused on this one small, healing act, pulling the torn edges of her skin back together. When he was done, he tied the last knot. They were both trembling, from the cold, from the adrenaline, from this terrible, powerful intimacy. He looked up. His face was inches from hers. His dark eyes were raw, unguarded. "It is done," he whispered. "Thank you," she whispered back. He did not move. He did not pull away. For one long, endless moment, he let his forehead rest against hers. It was not a kiss. It was more. It was a promise. It was an acknowledgement. It was a surrender. "We have," he whispered, his voice so rough it was barely a sound. "Many seasons to learn how to be together." He pulled back. The stitch was set. The promise was made. The battle was over. But as he looked at the cuffed prisoners and the armed railroad guards, he knew the war for Silver Hollow had only just begun. The march back to Silver Hollow was a spectacle. It was a procession of the New World Order. Up front, Taza Greyhawk, his rifle resting easy in his arms, his badge, though mud spattered, catching the weak light. Beside him, Dr. Reyes, his black bag now stained with Clara's blood. Then Clara, her arm in a sling, Alawa's vibrant sash tied around her waist, a shocking stripe of color against her torn, dirty dress. May Walsh, her rifle now slung over her shoulder, walked with her, a hand of support on her good arm. Behind them came the prisoners, Egan Crow and Rutherford Hale, their hands bound, their fine clothes ruined, their faces a mask of dirt and disbelief. Vince Calder, the matchmaker, had been found hiding under a cot and was now being prodded along by the saloon keeper. The railroad security men, their authority completely undermined, flanked the prisoners, their expressions grim. They were not guards. They were an escort for Taza's justice. And last, the rescued women, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale, walking toward a life they had not believed they would see. The town was waiting. They had heard the distant shots, the rock slide. They had seen the smoke. They were gathered in the street, a silent, fearful mass. They saw the procession, and a gasp went up. They saw Crow, the king, In cuffs, they saw Hale, the spider, exposed. They saw the proof of the rumors, the weeping women. Taza did not stop. He walked his prisoners straight to the town hall, which was also the church, the only building large enough to hold the entire town. He pushed the doors open. "We will have a meeting," he announced, his voice echoing in the rafters. "Now." The room filled in minutes. It was a standing-room-only crowd, the air thick with fear, curiosity, and the smell of wet wool. Taza, Dr. Reyes, and May's small band stood at the front, facing the town. The prisoners, Hale and Crow, were put in the front pew, guarded by the railroad men, whose captain now looked to Taza, not Hale, for orders. "You all know why we are here," Taza began. He did not shout. He spoke as if to the room, not the crowd. His voice was steady. "You know Egan Crow. You know Rutherford Hale. You know them as partners, as the men who own this town." He held up the packet of papers, the one bearing the Crow Ranch brand. "This is a bill of sale, for grain, for horses, and for women. He sold them to the mining camps, to his own saloon, for $50, for $100. A murmur of horror, of disbelief, went through the crowd. He then held up the small ledger, the one from Copper Gulch, and this is the record. The names: Mary Sutter, Ann Groden, Clara Ellison. He looked at Clara, his gaze holding hers for a second. Their names, beside the price he paid Rutherford Hale to have them delivered. The crowd turned its gaze on Hale, the railroad man, his face white, his composure cracking, leaped to his feet. "This is a lie, an Indian's fantasy, Captain." He snapped at the head of the railroad security. "This man is inciting a riot. He is delusional. Arrest him. I will see you are paid a bonus, $500, for his arrest." The captain, a hard-faced man, did not move. He looked at Taza. He looked at the evidence. $500, Taza repeated, his voice soft. "Is that the price for a woman?" "2, Mr. Hale." Before Hale could answer, May Walsh stepped forward. She was carrying a stack of heavy, dusty telegraph logs from the library's back room, the official archive. "He speaks of lies," she said, her Irish lilt sharp as a blade. "Let us talk of truth. Mr. Hale claims he is just a telegraph operator. He claims he has no part in this." She opened one of the logs. "I have here the original inbound messages, from the women, from Mary Sutter, from Ann Groden." She held them up. Then she held up the forged labor contracts Taza had found. "And I have here the letters that lured them, all of them." She laid them on the altar table for the whole town to see. The same handwriting, the same curl on the T, the same S that leans like a man in a hurry, the same hand that signed the Thomas Lang letters, the hand of Rutherford Hale. Haley looked at the logs, at his own handwriting, exposed, and he collapsed back into the pew, a broken man. The evidence was overwhelming. The town council, the men who had protected Crow, looked at the ground, their faces pale. It was over, except for the sentence. And then, a new voice. "He is a monster." The entire town turned. Prudence Vale was standing in the aisle, her hands ** in front of her, her face not angry, but broken, gray with fear. "Prudence," Egan Crow growled from the pew. "Shut your mouth." "No," she whispered, but her whisper carried in the silence. "I will not. I have been shutting my mouth for a year. For a year I have supported you. I have spread your rumors. I have been your voice." She looked at the crowd, her eyes wild. "I did it because I was afraid. Because my daughter, my Rose, she is 16, and a month ago, Egan Crow came to my shop, and he touched her." A collective gasp. "He told me," Prudence continued, tears now streaming down her face, "that she was a pretty thing, and that if I ever wanted to see my business succeed, if I ever wanted to stay on his good side, I would remember who holds the power here. He threatened my girl. He threatened my Rose. He said he would add her to his list. She turned, her face a mask of terrible, liberating hatred, and she pointed at Crow. "He is a monster. He is a poison, and I will not be silent anymore." That was the end. The social structure of Silver Hollow, the one built on fear and intimidation, had just crumbled. The brakeman stepped forward, the saloon keeper, one by one. Men and women who had seen small things, who had suspected, who had been too afraid to speak. They began to talk. The council had no choice. The railroad captain had no choice. He stood. Rutherford Hale, Egan Crow, Vince Calder, you are all under arrest by the authority of the Arizona Territory and the Transcontinental Railroad. You will be held for the U.S. Marshal. The sound of the men being let out, the heavy click of the church doors closing, was the sound of a fever breaking. In the quiet aftermath, the town, exhausted and ashamed, had to put itself back together. Dr. Reyes, his voice holding the weight of history, unrolled a scroll he had retrieved from his office. "As for the matter of the water," he said, his voice loud in the now quiet hall, "I have here a grant from the Mexican government, dated 1840. It predates the railroad. It predates this town. It predates the territory. It grants, in perpetuity, the land of the cypress grove and the spring within to the family of Greyhawk." He looked at Taza, and he smiled, a slow, deep smile. "Taza, your grandfather was a smarter man than any of us. The land is yours. The water is yours. The council, the town, Egan Crow, they have no claim. It is the oldest law in this land, and it is the one that will stand." The town council, desperate to regain some shred of authority, to show they were on the side of justice now, moved quickly, and the bank president said, standing, his face slick with sweat, We owe Miss Ellison an apology, and a debt. Her school, the town of Silver Hollow, will henceforth fund the school, a proper one, with a salary for her." Clara, leaning against May, her shoulder a dull, throbbing ache, could only nod. It was done. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired to her bones. Back in the cabin, the silence was different. It was not a tense, waiting silence. It was a settled silence. Chuli was asleep in his bed, his small face peaceful for the first time. May's library key clutched in his hand. Clara sat by the fire, her arm in its clean, white sling. The train had come in, the one that was supposed to bring Hale's security. It had also brought the mail. There was a letter for her. It was from her aunt in Kansas. She had read it once. Her aunt had heard rumors. A woman fitting her description, a mail-order bride, unclaimed, living with an Indian. The shame, the disgrace. Her aunt was offering a way out, a ticket home. She had a position for her, as a companion to an elderly widow, a small room, food, and a chance to regain her good name, a chance to save face. Clara looked at the letter. She looked at the small, cramped handwriting, at the words meant to save her, the words that felt like a prison. She thought of the life it offered, a small, gray room, a life of whispers, of being the poor niece, a life of being invisible. She looked around Taza's cabin. She looked at the carved cypress box on the shelf. She looked at the small drawing Chuli had made, now tacked to the wall. She looked at the fire. She did not hesitate. She crumpled the letter in her good hand and dropped it into the flames. She watched the edges curl, the black words of shame turning to gray ash, floating up the chimney. She was not from Kansas. She was not a mail-order bride. She was Clara Ellison, of Silver Hollow. She was so intent on the fire, she did not hear Taza enter. He stood behind her, watching the last of the letter burn. He said nothing for a long moment. He had come from the jail, from the long, hard work of giving his testimony to the railroad captain. He was covered in mud, blood, and exhaustion. He moved to sit beside her on the small hearth rug. They sat in silence, two survivors, watching the fire. "It is done," he said. "It is done," she agreed. He reached into his pocket. His hand, she saw, was not steady. "I dug this from the fence post the day Crow's man shot at me." He opened his hand. In his palm, a flattened piece of lead, ugly and gray. "And this," he said, reaching into his other pocket. He pulled out a small, buckskin pouch. From it, he poured a cascade of small, beaten silver conchos, small discs that had been part of a belt. They were alawas. They were from the cypress box. "I am not a man of words," he said, his voice rough, struggling. "I cannot give you what a man like Hale could. I do not have rings from a store or promises of an easy life." He looked at her, his eyes raw, all the walls down. "What I have is this land, this boy, this house, and it is a hard life. It will always be a hard life." Clara held her breath. She knew, before he spoke, what was happening. I melted them," he whispered. He opened his hand again. The lead was gone. The silver conchos were gone. In his palm sat a single, simple ring. It was not bright. It was a soft, dull, gleaming gray. The lead and the silver, the violence and the peace, the past and the present, melted together, reforged. It was imperfect, hammered by his own hands, but it was whole. "I do not want an easy life. Taza," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. She would not shed. "I want this one." He took her left hand, the one that was not in the sling. His calloused, rough fingers were so gentle. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was still warm from his body. It fit perfectly. They did not kiss. They did not need to. They just looked at each other, their hands clasped, the ring between them. A small sound made them turn. Shuli was standing in the doorway of his room. He was not asleep. He was watching them, his dark eyes wide. He looked at his father. He looked at Clara. He looked at the simple, gray ring on her finger. His face, which had been a mask of fear for so long, broke. It was not a smile. It was something deeper, a sunrise. He ran to them. He did not go to his father. He went to Clara. He threw his small, thin arms around her waist, burying his face in her dress, holding on with all his strength. He looked up, his face pressed against her, his eyes shining. He whispered a word. One she did not know. Naazi. It was soft, a breath, a name, a title, a word of honor. The steadfast one, the one who stays. He then reached out his other arm, pulling Taza in, his small hand grabbing his father's shirt, pulling them together. He held them both, a small, fierce boy, holding his new, broken, and finally, whole family. Taza put his arm around Clara, and his other arm around his son. He rested his head against Clara's. The fear, the great, cold fear of loving again, the fear of loss. It was still there. It would always be there. But it was not a wall of ice anymore. It was just a cold wind, and in his arms, he held a fire. He held his home. The train that took Egan Crow and Rutherford Hale away was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. The U.S. Marshal, a grim man with a face like tanned leather, had arrived. Listened to the railroad captain, to Taza, and to Prudence Vale, and had clapped the men in irons for the long ride to the territorial prison in Yuma. There was no crowd. The town, as if in a collective state of shame, stayed indoors. They watched from behind their curtains as the two men who had been their kings were led onto the cattle car, their reign ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, final click of a heavy lock and the hiss of steam. In the days that followed, An exhausted quiet settled over Silver Hollow. The rain passed, and a weak, watery sun began the hard work of drying the land. The town had to learn how to breathe again, how to be a town without its masters. The first test was the women, the 4 who had been rescued from the wagon. They had been staying with May Walsh, sleeping on cots in the library, their terror slowly receding. The railroad, in a rare act of corporate atonement, offered them all free passage, back to the homes they had left, back to the east. Clara, her arm in its sling, the stitches pulling but holding, stood with Taza on the station platform, the same platform where she had arrived, a lifetime ago. 2 of the women, their faces pale, but their eyes hard with a new, bitter knowledge, accepted the tickets. They boarded the train, their thin shoulders set, never looking back. They were going home. But Mary and Anne, the first 2 Taza and Clara had found, stood back. "I am not going back," Mary said, her voice quiet but firm. She was a plain woman, with a strong back. "I have nothing back there. No one, just the shame of leaving." "May has offered us work," Anne added, twisting her hands. "In the library? And Dr. Reyes, he needs an assistant, someone to clean, to help. I can do that. I can be useful here." Clara looked at them. She saw her own choice, her own words, reflected back. "You are welcome here," she said, and it was not a promise, but a statement of fact. Taza, who had been standing silent, nodded to the women. "May and the doctor," he said, "are good people to be with." The train pulled out. The women who stayed. Their dignity, which had been stolen and sold, was now being rebuilt by their own hands, by their own choice. Weeks passed. The mud turned to dust, but it was a different kind of dust. The wind still blew, but it no longer felt like it was trying to scour the town from the earth. The air was softer. On the high prairie, small, stubborn purple flowers began to push up through the gravel. It was spring. The town council, in its desperate attempt to rebuild public trust, declared a spring festival. It was a self-conscious, awkward gesture, but May Walsh and Dr. Reyes, in their wisdom, took it and made it real. It was not a grand affair. There were no railroad banners or speeches from politicians. May organized a town-wide bake, the women sharing their precious flour, the first good, honest food they had made in months. The saloon keeper, whose son was now one of Clara's most devoted pupils, provided not whiskey, but lemonade. And the brakeman, it turned out, could play the fiddle. He sat on the steps of the library and played, not the rowdy, drunken tunes of the saloon, but the old, sweet, sad songs of the hills he had come from. The music was thin, but it was hopeful. Taza, Clara, and Chuli came. They did not come as a spectacle, or as guests. They came as a family. Clara wore a simple blue dress May had helped her alter, her arm now free of the sling, though the shoulder was still stiff. The silver and lead ring on her finger felt as much a part of her as her own bones. Taza wore a clean shirt, and he had tied Chuli's hair back with a leather thong. No one stared, no one whispered. The townspeople, the ones who had stayed, the ones who had chosen a side by not leaving, nodded to them. The baker's wife pressed a warm, sticky bun into Chuli's hand. He looked at Taza, who nodded, and the boy, his face breaking into that new, rare smile, ate it with a serious, profound joy. A traveling photographer, a man who had gotten off the train hoping to document a Wild West town, found himself in the middle of a polite, slightly boring church social. He set up his big boxy camera, and he took pictures. He took a picture of the children, all 7 of them, sitting on the library steps. He took a picture of Dr. Reyes, laughing with May. And he took a picture of Taza, Clara, and Chuli, standing under the new, leafy branches of a cottonwood. They were not posing. Taza was looking at Clara, and Clara was looking at Chuli, who was looking at the fiddle player. It was a small, perfect triangle of attention, a family caught in the act of being. The next day, the legalities were settled. The new town council, with the bank president and the other survivors of Crow's regime, met. Taza was there. Dr. Reyes was there, with his grandfather's scroll. The council members, their faces slick with a new, eager humility, signed the papers. The Mexican land grant was officially entered into the territorial record. The land, the cypress grove, the spring, were Taza Greyhawks and his sons forever. The new cattle routes, the ones that respected the boundaries, were drawn up. Taza, in turn, signed a paper of his own. It was a lease, it leased, for the sum of $1 a year, a small portion of his spring's water, enough for the town's main cistern. It was not a surrender. It was a partnership. After, Taza did not go to the saloon to celebrate. He went to the general store and bought a shovel. He went to the far side of his property, to the grove, where the earth was still soft from the rains. He dug a hole, and then another. He planted a row of young cypress saplings, their needles a bright, fresh green. He was not just marking a boundary. He was healing the land. He was making a promise to the future, a line of green that would grow as his son grew. Clara's school found its own permanence. The corner of the library that had been her makeshift classroom was now, by order of the council, hers. The walls were whitewashed. The brakeman and the saloon keeper built a new, long desk and 3 new benches. Her class size had doubled. After the festival, Chuli, with a quiet, new confidence, had brought 3 other boys, Apache children, from the small camp at the edge of the reservation. They were shy, their eyes wide, and they spoke no English. The day after, the railroad workers' children, who had been afraid of the savage children, pointed and whispered. Clara, her bad shoulder aching, stepped between them. "Chuli," she said, in her clear, strong voice, "please tell your friends, in your language, that the word for book is—" She held it up. Book. Chuli stood, a small, proud interpreter, and said the word in Apache. Then she pointed to one of the railroad boys. "And Jack, please tell Chuli what the word for friend is." It was slow, it was hard, but it was a bridge. A fragile, tiny bridge, being built one word at a time, in the dusty, sunlit corner of the library. A week later, Mae Walsh hung the picture. The traveling photographer had left it for her. The black and white image, in its simple wood frame, hung above her desk. 3 under the cypress tree. She had written on the small card beneath it, a family, by choice. The healing was not just in the town. It was in the cabin. One evening, Dr. Reyes stopped by. It was not an emergency. It was a visit. "I am just checking on my patients," he said, his smile warm. He looked at Clara's shoulder, pronounced it was mending well. Then he turned to Taza. "And you," he said, "you have an old wound, on your own shoulder, from before, from the army days. I have been wanting to look at it for a year." Taza, who would have, a month ago, grunted and refused, now found himself looking at Clara. She was watching him, her arms crossed, her face set in that new, stubborn look of concern. He sighed, a long, put-upon sound, and he unbuttoned his shirt. Dr. Reyes examined the old scar tissue, the place where a bullet had passed through, a wound Taza had tended himself in the mountains. "It is healed, Taza," the doctor said, packing his bag. "But it is old. It will ache when the cold comes. You should have had it looked at. You should have—" "I know," Taza said, buttoning his shirt. He looked at Clara, and the corner of his mouth twitched, a small, almost invisible smile. "But now I have someone to yell at me when I forget to wear my coat. It is a new, terrible kind of pain." Clara threw a small, clean dish rag at him. Dr. Reyes, seeing the gesture, the easy, domestic intimacy, laughed, a real, full laugh. "I see," the doctor said, picking up his hat. "My work here is done. You are in much better hands." The last wound, the social one, the one that had festered the longest, took the longest to heal. One afternoon, as Clara was packing up her books, a shadow fell across the library door. Prudence Vale was standing there. She was not the same woman. The black, severe dress was the same, but the malice, the certainty, was gone. She looked small and old. Her daughter, Rose, was not with her. She had been sent back east, to family, to be safe. Clara stood, her heart suddenly pounding. She was not afraid, but she was wary. Prudence did not come in. She stood on the threshold, her hands clenching and unclenching at her waist. "Miss Ellison," she said, her voice a dry, rasping thing. She would not, or could not, look Clara in the eye. She was looking at the floor. I came to—" She started. She swallowed. "My daughter is gone. My business is— the women. They are not coming in. They look at me." She was not apologizing. She was complaining. She was still— Clara saw a woman lost in her own pride. Clara said nothing. She waited. Prudence finally looked up, her eyes bright with a terrible, angry shame. "He was a monster, but I helped him. I said those things. About you, and the deputy. I said them, and I am." She could not say the word. Clara, her shoulder aching from the damp, let out a long breath. She felt no anger, only a vast, deep weariness. "Yes, you did, Mrs. Vale," she said, her voice quiet. I want to enroll my niece." Prudence burst out, the words desperate. "She is coming to live with me. She needs schooling. I can pay." It was an offering, a plea, not an apology, but a transaction. It was the only language Prudence knew. Clara looked at the empty benches. She thought of the hate, the word whore shouted in the street. She thought of the long, hard road ahead for this town. "School is free, Mrs. Vale," Clara said, her voice even, giving nothing away. "We start at 9 o'clock. Do not be late." She turned her back and began to wipe the slate clean. Prudence Vale stood in the doorway for a long, silent moment. Then she turned, and she left. The cycle was not broken, perhaps, but it had been bent. Forgiveness was a long way off, but coexistence, that had just begun. That night, for the first time, Clara did not sleep in her small, narrow cot. Taza's cabin had one main room and one small one, and a bed, which he had shared with Alawa. He had not slept in it since she died. He slept on the floor, by the fire. Tonight, he did not. He built the fire up. He sat with Chuli, and he told him a story of the cypress, in their own language, his voice a low, warm rumble. Clara sat in the small room, the one that had been her refuge, and her prison. She looked at the cot. She looked at the ring on her finger. She picked up her blanket, and she walked into the main room. Taza stopped his story. Chuli looked at her. She did not say a word. She walked to the other side of the fire, opposite Taza. She laid her blanket on the floor. She lay down, her back to the warm stones, her face toward the two men who were her life. Taza looked at her, across the fire, across the small, sleeping boy. He did not smile. He did not need to. He simply nodded, a slow, deep acknowledgement, and he began his story again. Outside, the wind moved through the cypress grove, but it was not the high, thin, reedy scream of loneliness. It was a murmur, a sigh. It was the sound of the world breathing in Silver Hollow. For the first time, all was quiet. He did not write it down. He did not have the words, not in the way she did. But he thought it, in the long, quiet hours after Chuli had fallen asleep. And after Clara, her body still mending, had drifted off on her own blanket across the hearth. Taza would sit and watch the fire. He would look at the cypress box on the shelf. It was no longer a tomb, it was an archive. And he would have a conversation, a quiet report, with the woman who had laid the first stones of that hearth with him. Alawa, he thought, the name a soft, familiar shape in his mind. Not a sharp pain. You always said love was a lightning strike, the kind that splits a tree in two. I thought I had lost it when I lost you. But the lightning, that is just the beginning. It is not the real thing. The real thing is the fire that comes after, the one you have to feed, every day, the one that keeps the wood dry and the cold out. It is a steady fire. Our home is warmer now. Alawa, it is warmer by one person. The cabin was changing, in small, quiet ways. Taza came in from the line of new cypress saplings he had planted, his hands aching from the shovel. He stopped in the doorway. He was used to the small, clean space, but it was different. On the wall, on the single strong peg where he had always hung his gun belt, 2 new items had appeared. He had put that peg there for Alawa, to hang her weaving. For years, it had been empty, a painful reminder. Now, hanging from it, was the deep, dark, beautifully embroidered sash, the one of Alawa's he had given to Clara. He had washed the blood from it himself, the water running red, and the colors the deep sky blue. The cypress green were bright once more. And right next to it, sharing the same peg, was a splash of deep, warm blue. It was the woolen scarf May Walsh had given Clara, the one she had worn as a badge of dignity when the town had tried to strip hers away. The past and the present, his wife's memory, and his new wife's shield. They were not fighting for space. They were resting together, sharing the same nail. Partners. The winter, which had tried so hard to kill them all, finally broke its grip. The land, which had been a thing of gray rock and brown ice, softened. The air, no longer a blade, became a soft, warm thing that smelled of dust and, for the first time, of distant pine. The evenings were long, the sky a deep, velvety purple that held the light. They began to sit on the porch, a small, solid thing Taza had built, facing the cypress grove. He had a thing he had not touched, not since Chuli was a baby, an old, gut-strung guitar. He brought it out. His fingers, calloused and thick from ropes and reins, were clumsy on the strings. He did not play a song, not really. He played a sound, a low, thrumming, repetitive melody. It was the tune of the lullaby, the one she had heard through the wall on that first, terrible night. But it was not a song of grief anymore. It was a song of evening. Chuli, his bare feet dangling off the porch, his belly full of the stew Clara had made, would lean his small, heavy head against Taza's knee. His eyes, no longer wide with fear, would grow heavy. Clara sat in a chair, a new one, a gift from Dr. Reyes. Her shoulder was healing. It was a network of tight, pulling scars, a map of where the wood had torn her. It would always ache when the rain came, but it was strong. She had a book from May's library. She was reading aloud, not to them, but to the air, to the twilight. Her voice was clear, a steady, calm river of words that flowed over the sound of the guitar. Chuli would fall asleep, his breathing soft and even, from the grove, where Taza had built a new, stronger corral. The horses would nicker, Taza's own lean gelding, and the small, sturdy mare he had bought for Clara. A quiet stamp of a hoof, a soft huff. They were safe. The town was healing. Too, it was a slower, more awkward process. The town council, desperate to prove it was no longer in Egan Crow's shadow, had taken the massive fines levied against his estate and the penalties the railroad had paid to avoid a federal investigation into Rutherford Hale. At Dr. Reyes's fierce, unyielding insistence that money had been placed in a trust, a new sign was painted, and hung over the bank door, the Silver Hollow Fund for Migrant Women. It was a simple, practical thing. It guaranteed any woman who arrived in their territory, by train or by wagon, with a promise that had failed, would be given food, safe lodging, and a ticket to wherever she chose to go. Silver Hollow was learning, in its slow, hard way, to judge people not by the rumors that came with them, but by the actions they took when they arrived. Clara's school was a new, raw lumber building. The council had funded it, but the town had built it. The brakemen had built the roof. The saloon keeper's son had sanded the benches. Prudence Vale's niece was the first pupil enrolled, and Prudence herself, in a silent, grudging act of penance, had sewn the curtains. It was a real schoolhouse, with a real bell. Clara had rung it herself on the first day of autumn. Her class was large, a mix of white, Apache, and Mexican children, all learning, in their strange, halting mix of languages, how to write their own names. Taza's world had changed. Too, the youth, Marshall, the one who had taken Crow and Hale, had returned. He had come to the cabin. He had sat on the porch. He had drunk Clara's coffee, which was strong and black. He had not come with an arrest warrant. He had come with a small, tin star. It was not a deputy's badge. It was an honorary commission. Territorial Ranger. It does not mean much, the marshal had said, spitting coffee grounds into the dust, except that the law in this part of the territory knows who you are, and we know which side you are on. If you see something that is not right, you have the authority to make it right. Taza had not pinned the star to his shirt. He had nodded, gravely, and he had taken the star, and he had placed it inside the cypress box, on the shelf, with Alawa's things, a new honor, for the old. The seasons had turned. It was spring again, a full year. They were walking, the three of them, up to the ridge, the place where Taza had planted the cypress saplings. The trees had survived the winter. They were small, no taller than Chuli, but they were covered in a soft, bright, defiant green. They had taken root. The wind was warm. Coming up from the plains, it was a good wind. Clara, feeling it on her face, shivered, not from cold, but from the memory of it. Taza saw. He stopped. He turned her to face him. Chuli, seeing them stop, ran ahead, chasing a lizard. His laughter, a real, loud sound in the clear air. Taza looked at her. He still did not have the easy, smooth words. He had not said the words she had read in books, but he had showed them. Every day. He put his hands on her waist, drawing her close, his rough, clean shirt, her simple cotton dress. He rested his forehead against hers. It was the same gesture from the cave, the one that had been born of terror and pain. But now, there was no blood. There was no fear. There was only this solid, warm, quiet thing. There was no preacher, Clara whispered. Her eyes closed. There were no vows. We do not need them, Taza rumbled, his voice low. He pulled back, just enough to see her face. The lines of worry that had been etched there were gone. She was beautiful. I cannot promise you what those men in your books promise. I do not know how to promise forever. That is a white man's word, and it is too big. He took her hand, the one that wore the heavy gray ring. He held it up. I can only promise you the morning, he said, his voice rough with a feeling he still had no name for. I will be the man who is here when you wake up. I will be the man who adds a new log to the fire. I will be the one who stands with you, on this land. That is all I have. It was not a small promise. It was the biggest promise. It was not a vow of magic. It was a promise of work, a promise of daily, stubborn care. She put her good arm around his neck and kissed him. Family, Clara had learned, was not a thing you were given. It was a thing you built, one day at a time, one log on the fire, one word at a time, and justice. Justice was not a single, grand act on a bridge. It was the simple, courageous, an unending habit of seeing the truth and then tending to it. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood, watching their son. Below them, the lights of Silver Hollow were beginning to come on, small, pale yellow stars in the purple dusk. From their own chimney, the smoke rose, straight and true, a sign of a settled night, a calm wind. Far in the distance, miles away, a train whistle blew. It was a thin, lonely sound, but it was not a threat. It was not the sound of lies or of men coming to take what was not theirs. It was just the railroad. It was just the path, the long, iron road that, by some painful, winding, and perfect path, had brought a woman who was lost to the one exact place in the world she was meant to be. It had brought her home. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where in the world you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and hit that hype button. It truly helps more people find these stories and share in the journey.